So I'll stretch it out, but not very long. As people come in, we'll continue and stay on schedule. Give you just a minute to settle down, those that are here. I would like to introduce Elaine Ingham. Elaine and I have just met and at this conference. One thing we have in common we didn't realize is we both graduated from Colorado State University, so we've got to talk more in depth later. That'll be great. Elaine is the food web person, gal, and we are looking forward to having her take us into understanding the soil life that we're all trying to create with all our management above ground. We can't see what's happening underground, that reflection of the land that's above ground. And we're managing by leaves and soil surface. She's going to get into what's happening underground, that reflection that we can't see, but that is our soil capital, and we're living off the interest above ground. So Elaine has worked with, my understanding, with Rodale some, along with quite a few other places. Would like to welcome Elaine Ingham.
With that, if you are on the science panel after this, if you will go back to the AV booth, we'll get you mic'd up, so we'll be ready for that transition. So now, without further ado, the wonderful, the fine, amazing Elaine Ingham.
Thank you very much. I checked yesterday with Danielle, and she said that I could go until 5 o'clock. So is that all right? Because I'm not going to make it through this information until in just half an hour. Sorry, I don't talk that fast. Or you wouldn't be able to understand me if I talked that fast because you just couldn't follow what I'm talking about. So can I talk that fast? Yeah, probably. So life in the soil is what we're going to talk about. Typically, I give a 3-day course about life in the soil, so you really get to understand a lot of the nuances. I give a day-long course on compost and how to compost so that you have these wonderful organisms in your soil. And then I give a day-long course on compost extracts and compost teas, how to extract the organisms and grow them, so then it's easier to apply them in that liquid form. And then I teach a 2-day course on microscopy by a small microscope, $300 for a really good quality microscope, does shadowing. And so you can start looking at your own organisms in your own soil, starting to figure out, I don't have what needs to be present to grow the plant I want to grow. When we're growing weeds, if what Mother Nature is sending you is the information that you're trying to grow plants in dirt instead of soil, what do you have to fix? How do you fix that? Weedy species, things that we would all agree are weeds, disturbance requiring ecologically defined weeds, require strictly bacterial-dominated soils. As we get the fungi back into the soil, we are going to move our biology. We're going to change the soil so the conditions are set to grow other plants that we want. And I'm going to go through this whole system with you. But I would really like to have everybody in this room learn how to identify their own organisms. So you go out and grab the soil sample. You mix it up nice. You take 1 gram and put that into a test tube, and you add 4 mils of water, shake it for about 30 seconds. A drop of that mix goes on a microscope slide, a cover slip goes on top of that. You look through the microscope and you go, oh, there's nothing there. No wonder what I'm growing are weeds. Or, hopefully, you could look through the microscope and you go, wow, look at everything moving around, and I got fungi and I got protozoa, and it's just, yeah, all right. I'm going to grow some good grass this year. So you can figure this one out for yourself. It takes just about 20 minutes for you to do an assessment like that. So better than you waiting for 2 weeks to get the information back from a laboratory. You assess your biology right now. No changes because that sample had to go through the mail. what changes might happen between you put it into the overnight FedEx Express or the overnight bag and it gets to the laboratory and then we look at it and we send you the information back. Because when did you need to know? 2 weeks from now? You need to know right now. And so that's what we would like to do, is teach you how to do your own assessments. Yes, I would love it if all of you in the room would send me samples so I could make some money. But that is not my purpose in life. So teaching you how to do it yourself. So yes, I have the Bachelor's of Arts degree, the Master of Science, the PhD. Look at that, I got the alphabet soup after my name. Woo! So Soil Food Web is my company. I started it. Soil Life Consultants. I work with a number of landscape architects and trying to bring along a whole herd of students learning how to do this. So if you want to get hold of me, it's soilfoodweb@aol.com. And if you send me an email and I don't answer within 3 days, send it again, because your email is now down about 500 or 600 emails in my list, and I don't always get back to them. I apologize, but that's how life works. So when we're looking at life in the soil, and we start trying to understand what the benefits are of what this biology does for you in the soil, I like to show this picture because a lot of people who grow grass can't believe that root systems of grass grow this deep. This is a 3-month-old grass plant. And because the soil had the biology, because the organisms were there building the structure, protecting that root system from disease-causing organisms, cycling nutrients and keeping that plant healthy, that plant has put its root system down 4.5 feet in a 3-month period. Imagine how deep these roots are going to go by the time this plant gets to be 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 years old. How far down can roots go? And it's based on the plant that you're growing. You have to know something about your plant. When we're looking at ryegrass in somebody's lawn, how far down can the root systems of ryegrass go? Easily 15 feet. So if you go home and you look at the grass in your pasture, and if it's not down at 15 feet, what's the take-home message? Mother Nature's trying to tell you, you're trying to grow plants on dirt, and you are not going to be successful. We need to get this biology back in the soil. This is work that I did with Hendrika Schraven, who's a landscape architect up in Seattle, Washington. And this is Hendrika's holding that plant. We grew grass in a sward area with really good biology down into the soil. We punched a PVC pipe down into the soil, pulled the plant, roots and all, up out of the soil, cut the PVC pipe open, washed that root system with a little bit of water from the hose, and took the picture. Hendrika Schraven is a 6.5-foot tall person. That root system is 4.5 feet, and that's only 3 months old. So we need to get this biology to build structure, to get that root system to grow as deep as it possibly can. If the roots of your plants are down even at 4.5 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, do you have to worry about drought in the summertime? Nah. We're going to get all the water that we need moving into that soil, infiltrating and being held in that soil, because that plant is putting out exudate. The plant puts out the foods to feed the organisms. Every single plant releases exudates from its root system. What's an exudate? Isn't this like the secret society of scientists? What do you mean when you say exudate? Yes, we have our own language, and we don't want you to know what we're talking about, because don't we sound smart when we use the foreign language? So what's an exudate? Well, if you take the meaning of that word, it's something that's exuding from the body. Oh yeah, sweat. That's an exudate. So when we're releasing these things, what exactly is the chemical composition of an exudate coming out of the root system? And guess what? It's coming out of the top part of the plant too. Every leaf, all of the bark, when we're looking at flowers, when we're looking at fruit, They're all releasing exudates to grow the proper set of microorganisms on the surface of the plant, to protect the plant from disease, to cycle nutrients, to build structure in that soil. So exudates. Exudates are comprised mostly of simple sugars, a little bit of protein, and a little bit of carbohydrate. So when I ask you to go into your kitchen and make me a recipe of that material, what's simple sugar in your kitchen? White sugar, brown sugar, honey, molasses, all those wonderful sugary things. So take a bowl, and you're going to put a bunch of sugar in there, maybe a little bit of all of those different kinds. And now I'm going to go get some protein. What's protein in your kitchen? Eggs, maybe some cheese, milk. So let's put that in there. Okay, carbohydrate. What's carbohydrate in your kitchen? Flour. So now I've got mostly sugar, a little bit of protein, a little bit of carbohydrate. What is this a recipe for? Cakes and cookies. Your plant is releasing cakes and cookies out into the soil in order to grow these bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and we need to understand what these organisms do for your plant, and that's where I'm planning on going today. Notice the fact that we cut this plant a couple times during the year. So about 3 days before we punched the hole and pulled this root system up, we cut this plant to 1/2 inch. Now, if it's true that when you cut the top part of the plant to 1/2 inch, it causes the root system to slough off to 1/2 inch. If that's true, then this root system regrew in 3 days, 4.5 feet. I don't think so, do you? This plant did not lose any of its root system. When it was artificially grazed, otherwise known as mowing, it did not cause any loss of that root system. If this plant's healthy, it does not lose any of the root system. That's stored carbon. It does not have to be replaced. It is not a metabolic drain on your plant. So when your animals graze your plants and your plants are healthy, you're not losing any of the root system. In fact, what happens, and there's a couple of papers in the scientific literature that show this, from back in 1984, 1986, 1989, that show that when you graze the above ground part of a plant, it causes a massive flush of exudates out of the root system. And so if you're putting a massive amount of sugar, proteins, cakes and cookies into the soil, the bacteria and fungi are going to respond and start growing very, very rapidly. The bacteria and fungi are the organisms that make the enzymes to pull nutrients out of your sand, out of your silts, out of your clays, out of your organic matter, out of the rocks and out of the pebbles, and store those nutrients in the bacterial and fungal biomass. There is not going to be any leaching. You are not going to lose any of those nutrients because they are not soluble. They are not plant available. So how do we get those nutrients? That the plant has directed the bacteria and fungi to go out, make those enzymes, pull those nutrients into their bodies. How do we get those nutrients available back to the plant? Well, that's where we have to have the predators of the bacteria and fungi. And who are the predators of the bacteria and fungi? Well, bacteria are eaten by protozoa. Hopefully in an aerobic system, it's going to be the flagellates and the amoebae. It's going to be the bacterial-feeding nematodes. Bacterial-feeding nematodes, what do they eat? Bacteria, yes. So the things that eat bacteria, what eats fungi in soil? Well, it's going to be the fungal-feeding nematodes and the fungal-feeding microarthropods. Earthworms eat both bacteria and fungi. They're pretty nonspecific. So anytime the bacteria and fungi are eaten by any one of their predators, the nutrients that have been tied up at extremely high concentrations in the bacterial and fungal biomass are going to be released into the soil right at the surface of your root. So when that plant is grazed, flush of exudates, millions and billions of bacteria, miles and miles or kilometers and kilometers of fungal hyphae going to be grown, pulling nutrients into their bodies. Here come the bacteria feeders, the protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods, the fungal feeders. They're going to eat the bacteria and fungi and release right to that root system precisely the nutrients in all of the balance, in the proper balance for your plant. And so at precisely the moment that that plant is beginning to regrow the above ground biomass, photosynthesizing, yeah, your plant's making all the sugar it needs, but where's it going to get the nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, iron, zinc, borate, the whole mix? How many nutrients do plants require? All of them. I love the fact that, you know, when I was a little kid, how many essential nutrients did we think about? Well, how old am I? You know, well, 63 years ago. How many essential nutrients? 3. NPK, right, like that's going to grow a plant. That's going to grow you, excuse me. So by the time I got to high school, how many essential nutrients? It was up to 8. By the time I was in college, how many essential nutrients? It was up to 12. Today, how many essential nutrients? Most plant physiologists will agree. Most, notice I said most, because in the world of science, do we agree on stuff? So, most plant physiologists will say, how many essential nutrients? You don't know? Do you guys grow plants for a living? Okay, because we argue about it all the time. Well, it's the answer to the universe. Remember The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? What's the answer to the universe? 42. There are 42 essential nutrients, and you better balance them all correctly. You put an inorganic fertilizer out, you put rock dust out, are you going to be balancing the nutrients for your plant in a plant-available form? You put nitrate fertilizer out, have you not messed up the physiology of your plant? Because you forced just one nutrient in extremely high concentrations. Can't be doing that. Your plant needs balance. And so when those bacteria and fungi are eaten by the protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, earthworms, and such, balance of all of the nutrients. Your plant takes it up and starts to regrow using the sugars to form the structures, to form the protein, the carbohydrates, all of the lipopolysaccharides, all the essential metabolites that that plant has to have. Your plant doesn't slough the root system. If it sloughs its root system, how is it going to get the nutrients that it needs? How is it going to get the water that it needs? So there's no loss of nutrients. But what if you come in and you graze that plant and you allow those animals to come back before the sugars and the proteins and the carbohydrates get replaced and stored again in that root system? You're stressing the plant. It's a little bit of trouble because when you come in and graze again, it forces a big pulse of nutrients, the exudates, out into the soil. And so the bacteria and fungi grow, the protozoa and nematodes, and they're releasing the nutrients back to your plant. Your plant starts to regrow. What if you come in and graze too soon? Now you're really stressing your plant. How many times can you come back and eat that grass too soon before the nutrients are restored, replenished in that root system to the point where if you do this often enough, yes, then your root system is going to slough. And if you slough your nutrient gathering capacity, if you slough off the mechanism by which you obtain water out of the deeper regions of the soil, especially in a dry summer period, what's going to happen to your plant? Okay, it dies. So there's a message from Mother Nature. If your root system looks like this, is there a root system on here? This is out of a golf course green that has been hammered excessively. And look at the root system of that grass. Yes, it is cut to 1/8 of an inch every day, and the root system goes down to there, 1/8 of an inch deep. And so you see where grass people dealing with turf, they say, well, because we cut the top of the plant to 1/8 of an inch, the root system only goes down 1/8 of an inch. Right. Look at whatever the other information is in this soil. What's causing that black, dark color? When you take that coring tool and you punch a hole in that turf and you pull this core up, what's the smell? Woo-hoo! Yeah. Oh boy, does that smell bad. It's a mixture of ammonia, a little hydrogen sulfide, rotten egg smell, a little vomit, a little putrescine, a little acetic acid, and a little sour milk smell. What does that smell like? Yeah, oh, yummy. Yeah, and what is that telling you? This soil went anaerobic. This black dark layer is the residues that are left behind when we lose our nitrogen as a gas, when we lose our sulfur as a gas, when we lose our phosphate as a gas. And so if we allow this soil to go anaerobic, we're losing the nutrients that would otherwise be available for our plant to be able to regrow. As we go anaerobic, all kinds of other bad things are produced, and I want to very quickly go through that. How do we rebuild the structure in that soil? And what happens to your root system as we rebuild the structure in that soil? So yes, a very stressed plant because the root system is only going down 1/8 of an inch. There's a really horrific thatch layer. We've got to chew up, we've got to decompose that thatch layer so the anaerobic disease-causing fungi, the root-feeding pests are not going to find this a happy habitat anymore. Right now, this is one sick, unhealthy, unhappy plant. So what we do is we come along and we apply the proper sets of organisms in a compost tea when we're dealing with turf because they don't like compost, they don't like the organic matter sitting on the surface of the soil. So between this picture and the next one I'm going to show you, we have applied compost tea, where we have extracted the organisms using water, aerobic conditions, put a little bit of additional foods in to really push fungal growth. And after a 24-hour tea brew, we apply that tea, and we have done that 3 times. Can you notice what's happened to the anaerobic compounds present in the soil? They've disappeared. The bacteria, the fungi have eaten those materials, put it back into the structure of their bodies in the organic matter, and the root system on this turf, there's our turf, we're still cutting it in 1/8 of an inch every day. How far down are the root systems? This is the bottom of the root system. So in approximately a month, that root system has grown down a good 4.5 inches. Do not tell me that because we cut the top of the plant, it's going to cause the roots to slough off. Because we are growing roots. Today, the roots in this golf course are down at about 8 feet. And they're still mowing it every day to 1/8 of an inch through the growing season. Not going to lose roots. So we need to understand this whole system below ground. We need to understand what happens when you compact your soil. And think of all the different things we do out in our agricultural systems, even in our turf systems, in orchards. Think of the things that we do constantly to compact that soil. Every time we drive big equipment up and down and over our soils, we're compacting at depth. And when you drive a pickup truck over your soil, where do you compact your soil? It's not at the surface. Plant physics tells us that the compaction layer is going to form at depth based on the weight of the equipment and the width of the tire. So your typical common everyday pickup truck is going to cause compaction at about 18 inches. Why do we think root systems of our plants don't go more than 18 inches? Well, where's your compaction? So start looking for where that compaction layer is. Here's an example, scientific literature, showing that in a well-drained soil, that root system is going to go all the way down until it hits the compaction layer. Waterlogged soil causes mottling. When we're looking at the water-filled pores, the 100% moisture in that soil, that's going to cut those roots off at that depth. What if our water table, our anaerobic layer is up a little bit higher? Well, okay, look at what's happening to your plant. Basically, it's going to kill the plant. So what's actually happening under anaerobic conditions when we waterlog the soil, when we impose compaction? In this was too good a picture to pass up. This neighbor wanted to build a barbecue pit. So they dug down into the soil and look at that profile. Why is it that the roots of that tree or the grass or that shrub, why aren't they going down deeper into that soil? Tree roots can push their way through concrete. They will break up dams. How can these roots not be going down through that compaction layer? Because there's something else involved. When we compact soil, water moving down into the soil is going to not be able to move. from soil of one density into soil of a different density. And so there's our compaction. Water cannot move through. So water hangs up right here. Oxygen cannot move through water very rapidly at all. And so see that black, dark, anaerobic layer? And that's why that root system cannot grow any deeper than that. And so we think it's normal. In the world of arboriculture, in the world of agriculture, we think that because we see over and over and over again, we see roots going down just a little ways and then going sideways, we think that's normal. No, no, no. This is an artifact of the damage that we as human beings do to our soils. When you apply an inorganic fertilizer, it's a salt. You are going to be killing these organisms. When you use a pesticide, anytime a pesticide is used, it's going to kill way more than the target organism. So we can't be doing those things. We've got solid science to tell you why your clients, talking with them, getting them to convert from a conventional system, how we can, what the problem is and how they need to move along. So under anaerobic conditions, what precisely is it that's killing your root systems? Well, one of the things that's going to happen when we go anaerobic, and this is a compost pile, you can see the outer layer, all the starting materials. This particular pile was built with 50% manure. Woo! How fast are we going to go anaerobic if this pile is 50% manure? Wood chips, we've got some leaves, and you can see that it was ground too finely. Oxygen isn't penetrating any deeper than this. And you can see this facultative anaerobe starting to win in competition with all our good guy organisms in here. Yes, this is aerobic, but at about 4 inches deep into that compost pile, oxygen is dropping down into anaerobic conditions. And we see this white ashy layer. When I go out and start working with people in composting, they will always invariably tell me, oh, see, look at the good fungi. What? That's not fungus. That's a facultative anaerobe. That's an actinobacteria that if you use this material, if this gets put anywhere next to the root system of a plant with mycorrhizal fungi, the actinobacteria will kill your mycorrhizal fungi. Say goodbye. So we can't be allowing that. How well is your plant going to grow? If it needs to be mycorrhizal and you wipe out the mycorrhizal fungi with the wrong set of organisms going into your soil. So if you see this in your compost pile, turn it. Get oxygen back into your pile. Another thing that happens under anaerobic conditions, so I'm going to go through a series of what happens when we go from aerobic conditions in your soil or your compost tea or your compost extract or any place. Your aerobic organisms, or the aerobic conditions, the predominant form of nitrogen in your soil is going to be as organic matter or in protein. Most of your nitrogen in your soil is not in the soluble inorganic forms of nitrogen. It's in organic matter. It's in protein. Where's the protein in your soil? It's in the organisms. So the soluble inorganic forms of nitrogen. So nitrate grows annual plants. Nitrite will kill your plant if your nitrate is anywhere close to your root system. So we want your nitrifying bacteria to very rapidly remove nitrate and turn it into nitrite. Ammonium grows perennial plants. So we need these forms of soluble inorganic nitrogen in the soil. But under anaerobic conditions, the aerobic organisms just go to sleep. The anaerobic organisms wake up and, yep, they're going to make organic matter, they're going to make protein. The problem is the anaerobic organisms are going to take the soluble inorganic forms of your nitrogen and convert it into ammonia gas. And it leaves behind a black residue. How can you grow plants without soluble inorganic nitrogen? Because that gas blows off, it's gone, you are not going to be able to grow the plants you once could have grown. And what's ammonia going to do to the root system of your plant? Kills it. So, what happens to sulfur under anaerobic conditions? Same kind of thought process. Sulfur is usually present in the organic matter or protein. the soluble inorganic forms of sulfur. What's the form of sulfur your plant takes up? There's the list of soluble inorganic sulfur compounds for you. Which is the form your plant takes up? So I love it, how your education has been, you haven't been told. So sulfate, SO4, that's what your plant requires. But under anaerobic conditions, what happens to all of these forms of sulfur? They get converted into hydrogen sulfide. It's a gas. It's going goodbye. How are you going to grow a plant? They won't grow their roots into that soil because it's not really soil anymore. We are turning it into dirt because that sulfur is going away as a gas. It leaves behind a black residue. So you know when it's happening to you. When we go anaerobic, your phosphorus. So the predominant form of phosphorus in your soil is in the organisms, your organic matter, membranes of your organisms. So there's the inorganic, your rock phosphorus, You have, drives me crazy, when we get people saying, our soils are really poor, there isn't any phosphorus left. What? Is that true? I'll show you what actually is present in your soil in just a few minutes after we get done with anaerobic problems. Under anaerobic conditions, of course, your phosphate, which is the form of phosphorus that your plant must have in order to take it up, your phosphate is going to be converted into phosphine gas. It's a gas. Say goodbye. How are you going to grow a plant? So under anaerobic conditions, we're losing our ability to grow the plant. Phosphine gas, does it smell? Does it, because like with ammonia, all of you have smelled ammonia, right? You know what that smells like? If you don't know, go to the grocery store and open the bottle of ammonia. Woo! You all know what hydrogen sulfide smells like? Rotten eggs, yummy. Mix a little ammonia and a little rotten egg together. What do we call that? Downwind to the stockyard. Now, you can't smell phosphine gas, but this is one of the things we used as the trench warfare gases back in World War II, World War I. If you breathe any phosphine gas, it will kill you. So don't be chasing the fairy lights in the swamp. Don't go chasing will-o'-the-wisps because those are clouds of phosphine gas. So anaerobic, you're losing your phosphorus. You cannot grow the plants you once could have grown. Under anaerobic conditions, we make some really nasty acids. And so under anaerobic conditions, only under anaerobic conditions do you produce these things. So acetic acid, what's that smell? That's vinegar. Butyric acid, what's that smell? See, I'm required as a scientist to use the scientific name, right? So butyric acid, sour milk, rancid butter. Valeric acid, what's that smell? Vomit. So when you're trying to remember this, V for vomit. Valeric acid. Putrescine, what does that smell like? Ooh. Now mix all of these things together. Yeah, just totally disgusting. It's what Sir Albert Howard called sour soil. The sour flavor that happens because you mix all of these things and the ammonia and the rotten egg together. When you're producing these things only under anaerobic conditions, these are all toxic to your plant, and these things by themselves will kill your plants, kill the roots. But another insult that's added here is what's the pH that's going to be produced under anaerobic conditions? The pH of these compounds is a pH of 2. So as the anaerobic conditions go on longer and longer and you produce more of these acids, what's going to happen to the pH of your, dare we call it soil? Your pH is going to plummet. There is no way to get a soil that has a pH below 5.5 unless you go anaerobic, at which time it's dirt, and now start calling it dirt. If your pH is less than 5.5 in your soil, it's not soil. Because we've killed the organisms that help build structure, that protect your plant, that do the nutrient cycling. So no wonder your roots will not grow into these compacted anaerobic places. pH of, how are you going to fix this? Oxygen, organisms, build structure, get the oxygen back in there. they start to utilize all these nasty materials. Oops, going the wrong way. And recover your soil. But we've got to do that process in order to be able to grow plants in our soils ever again. And then, the most toxic plant material known to man, alcohol. If you have alcohol formation in your soil, well, how could you have alcohol formation in an aerobic condition? It has to go anaerobic. Why is it that you can drink alcohol and you're not killed? Because you've got a liver. How many plants do you know that have livers? They're completely defenseless against the effects of alcohol. Alcohol will solubilize the membranes, destroy the ability for your plant to hold anything within that root system, and it's going to die. So all of these bad things happening under anaerobic conditions, we do not want to allow anything to go anaerobic. And I get until 5 o'clock. So formaldehyde, phenols, what do they do to your plant? Yep, kill things. So here we are in an agricultural system. And where's the compaction layer in that soil? It's right at the plow layer. So because the plow pushes down on the surface of the soil at that depth, we're compacting it down. Water moving through here is going to hang up at the compacted layer. It's going to go anaerobic. And now good luck getting the roots of your crop. If the roots of your crops are only going down 4 to 6 inches, 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters, whatever it is, how could you possibly have enough water to keep your plant healthy and happy? How can that root system get the nutrients that it requires? On top of the fact that the anaerobic conditions are killing those roots right there at that layer. And so they're open infection courts for the diseases that grow in anaerobic conditions. So how far down do roots go? They ought to be able to go, certainly all of our productive grasses. So this is a picture from the Great Plains of the United States, where back in the early parts of the 19th century, the Conservation Service, Conservation Corps went out and dug pits down to 40 feet in the Great Plains of the United States. They then came along with a fire truck and washed the surface of that pit with a little bit of water so it was easier to see the roots. They put plate glass up against that profile, tracing paper on top of that, and they traced by hand the root systems of these grasses. When you look at this scale along here, this scale goes down to 25 feet. How far down do roots of grasses go? The most productive, the best grasses in the Great Plains of the United States, the ones that give the most protein to your animals, are the ones whose root systems go way deep into the soil. Some plants, they'll only go 15 feet, 8 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet. Can you tell me which one of these plants is Bromus tectorum, cheatgrass? Look for the plant with the smallest, the tiniest root system. Can you find him? Over there on the way left. Can you tell me why? It's called cheatgrass. Your animals eat cheatgrass, they're going to die. Because there is no nutrition in that plant. It can't get the nutrition out of the soil. Weeds do not put their roots deep into the soil. Root system of a weed only goes just a couple of inches into the soil. A weed sucks nutrients out of the soil as rapidly as it can and goes into seed production. Those seeds disperse and it goes back through its life cycle. Weeds cannot support the growth of our animals. So we need to get this biology back into that soil to build this structure for us. So how far down can roots go? We have to alleviate the compaction so the root systems can go down as deep as they possibly can. How deep is soil? I already mentioned that, so I'm just going to go on. Does your soil actually contain nutrients deeper than 4 to 6 inches? This is another one that drives me crazy when I talk to soils people, agronomists, horticulturalists, roots, all of the nutrients are concentrated in the top 4 to 6 inches of your soil, the top 5 centimeters. Is that true? Absolutely not. Because we're going down 90 centimeters, and there really is not much of a change in any nutrient, except for where we've got a lot of leaching happening. Okay, look at that. What if you calculated the amount of lime you have to put in your soil by measuring this? And somebody would tell you you'd have to put 6 to 8 tons of lime on per acre in order to get the calcium up so you can grow plants. When in fact, when your roots go down, look at the calcium it's going to hit. So we really need to rethink. Anything that soil chemists have been telling you about your soil, start rethinking it. Because why would they misinform you? What are they trying to sell you? Where are they getting their money? If they can convince you to buy lime, please realize they're getting a kickback. They're getting paid because they're getting you to buy that lime. They are typically getting a kickback from selling you gypsum, from selling you phosphate, from selling you things you do not need. When we look at soil, what is soil? Well, defined by Hans Jenny, the father of soil science. This is the guy who started it. And he defines soil as the mineral component, the sand, the silt, the clay. Where does sand, silt, and clay come from? It's breakdown of your parent material, the bedrock, of all of the rocks and the gravel. And so as that splits apart into the different size fractions of the mineral material in your soil, very important component, because this is where your mineral nutrients are stored. They're not leachable. They're not going anywhere. Soil, by definition, must have organic matter. And typically, when we're looking at productive soil, that organic matter must be above 3%. If you want to be growing these organisms, because of course that's what the organic matter is there for, is to grow these organisms. And so soil, by definition, contains the aerobic organisms that we require. When we look at the mineral component of your soil, this stores all the nutrients. Are the nutrients present in the sand, the silt, and clay adequate to grow your plants? This table is in every introductory soil science textbook. There is no soil on this planet that lacks the nutrients to grow plants. There is no soil that can't grow plants. Why are you putting inorganic fertilizers out there? Why is the conventional system saying the only way to be able to produce plants is to put those inorganic nutrients back out there? Why is it that people tell you that when you harvest your plants from your systems, you're carting off the nutrients, and now you're going to have to add those nutrients back? Really? They're already in your soil. Look at the amount of calcium. And this is per gram of your soil. Look at the nitrogen. Look at the phosphorus. Look at it's absolutely garbage. When somebody says, oh, we're in danger because we're running out of phosphate on our planet and we're going to have to find some really high-tech way to get phosphorus out of wherever they think it is. Because look at how much phosphorus is present in 1 gram of your soil. You've got enough phosphorus to grow the next 100 years of your plants in that soil. And what if you use up all this phosphorus that's present in this gram of the soil? Do you have another gram of soil hanging around? Is your mineral material, your sand, your silt, and clay, is replenished every second of every day? Your bedrock is breaking down, your rocks, your gravel, your pebbles. Does organic matter have light? Does organic matter have phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, all of this list? Well, of course it does. So until the day you run out of sand, silt, clay, rocks, pebbles, ground, bedrock, or organic matter, there should be no reason to put additional nutrients back into your soil. Oh, you've got to put rock dust out there. What? I think you already got rocks in your soil. Any of you lacking rocks? Any of you lacking organic matter? No, there's no reason. So then why is it then that when we put fertilizer out there, the plants start to grow? because that's not soil, that's dirt. Mother Nature is telling you a very important message. If you put fertilizer out there and your plant starts to grow, you don't have the life in your soil. And remember, in the definition of soil, you have to have the organisms. That must be present. If you don't have the organisms to do the nutrient cycling, it's dirt. Start calling it what it is when you put an inorganic fertilizer out and your plants start growing. So think of a soil chemistry test and kind of the different pools of nutrients that soil chemists like to talk about. They will talk about the soluble pool. That's what's in solution. And of all the total amount of nutrients that are present in your soil, only this teeny tiny little bit is actually in solution. We need to have the organisms to pull those mineral nutrients out of the rocks, the sands, the silts, the clay, the organic matter, and convert it into the exchangeable and into the soluble pool. It is life that does that. No life, it's not soil, you can't grow plants. So we have to get this biology back into the soil. We must understand this food web so that we aren't going to be held hostage by people who want to sell you something that you do not need. So, the soil food web. All of the critters in your soil. So when you think about this, here's my plant fixing energy in the form of sunlight energy in the sugars. The sugars are put down into the root system. The exudates come out of those roots and they grow bacteria and they grow fungi. Bacteria make the enzymes to pull the nutrients from your sands, your silts, your clays, your rocks, your pebbles, and your organic matter. All of the nutrients for any living organism have to be balanced just about the same in all cells. So they're pulling those nutrients inside. The bacteria will build the micro aggregates. So all those little clay particles start to be glued together by the glues that the bacteria form around their bodies. Why would bacteria make glue? Why would they require a nice glue layer around their body? Because if they're free in the soil solution, what happens to them? They're going to be washed away from their food. The bacteria want to be glued onto the surface of your plant root. They want to be glued on the rocks and the pebbles. They don't want to wash away from their food resource. Think about a bacterium that's not making glue, and water starts coming through that soil. This bacterium is going to be going, no, that's my lunch. Don't take me away. Oh, no, I'm going to die. So they make glue. It's a worthwhile use of their energy. So they are glued to the surfaces of anything that they can be glued to, and that builds micro aggregates, the smallest building block of structure within the soil. The fungi then come along, and they are going to bind those micro aggregates together into macro aggregates. So now when you pick up your soil, and at any time during the year, you should be able to put your hand into the soil, pick up a handful without breaking your nails, without having to get a shovel, without having to get an implement to be able to punch into that surface. It should be well structured at all times of the year if you've got adequate life, adequate organic matter. Stick your hands in the soil, shake it. Can you see all the air passageways, hallways, all the little caves in that structure built by the bacteria and fungi? The higher level predators, they're eating bacteria and fungi and releasing nutrients, nutrient cycling, done by organisms. But these guys move the microaggregates, move the macroaggregates, they kind of rearrange them. They kind of decide where all the different furniture is going to go in your soil house. And so they're building structure so the root systems of your plants can go down as deep as they possibly can. You will never run out of nutrients. You will never run out of water. Jeff Lawton and I have worked together in places where we've gone out into stone deserts. And Jeff rebuilds the structure in the soil. We get the swales back in there, places to hold water, hold moisture. We make sure that the biology is in the soil so the plants can grow. And most of the rain, most of the water that we get in those desert systems is from dewfall. But over the course of the next couple months, we will accumulate enough dew so we will have open ponds of water. We have taken stone desert and turned them into an oasis in the course of one growing season. Chris Henegler in Australia has done the same thing in the Northern Territories. I'm sure many of you have these kinds of an example, but we have to have the biology to build the structure in that soil. So structure, nutrient cycling, protection of the root system against diseases, and of course then also above ground. So these are the benefits that your plant will receive from having the right sets of organisms present in your soil. And while I would love to talk about these things, I'm running out of time. So where do you get the organisms to put back into your soil? Grow your own compost. Grow the indigenous local organisms, the species that survive in your conditions. There's just one more thing we really need to understand. Yeah, we work a lot here in England at Laverstoke Park. I was going to tell you the whole process of how we got there, but one more thing, one more point. I've got to talk fast. When I started doing my work at Colorado State University, one of the things we started looking at were all these different ecosystems. And that was the first time ever anybody ever showed that in the least productive ecosystem, extremely weedy, lots of problems in here, this was strictly bacterial dominated. Dryland wheat, where we're not using pesticides, we're not using inorganic fertilizers. There are a few weeds in there, but a little bit of fungi coming into the system, suppressing a lot of the weed growth. Shortgrass prairie, a lot better diversity. We have very few weeds, a little bit more fungal biomass in that soil. Tallgrass prairie, whoa, equal biomass of fungi and bacteria in that soil. There are no weeds. Years we worked out on the tallgrass prairie, the tallgrass was 12 feet tall. I got lost a few times out there. Kind of fun. High mountain meadows, where the productivity was taken off by sheep and by cattle that they run on the meadows up in the mountains, so more productive. Lodgepole pine forest, the most plant production of any of these ecosystems, so counted as the most productive. Note that we're using plant production, not wheat production. Okay, so that's kind of warped if you're looking at food for human beings versus all of the plant material produced. Very fungal dominated. 100 to 1,000 times more fungal than bacterial. And this is the first time anybody ever noticed this. This is the first time this is published. So when we go through succession, early in succession where no plants will grow, it's strictly bacterial dominated. You start to build that food web when you have enough nutrient cycling. Weeds will germinate, they will grow, they'll come into the system, but very bacterial dominated. 10 times more bacteria than fungi. Start getting weeds, you have a little bit of fungal food being put into that system. And so early successional grasses, the Bermudas, the brassicas, the cole and kale crops, non-mycorrhizal plants. But look at the fungal to bacterial biomass. It's a little bit more fungal. And that's what sets the stage to grow these plants and not those. Keep increasing that fungal biomass because there's more lignans and cellulose in those plants. Eventually, you will succeed into the mid-successional grass species, our vegetables, our Solanaceae, tomatoes, potatoes, those sorts of things. Only a quarter more bacterial than fungal. And then into our row crops, our highly productive grasses, very late in succession, high protein contents in those grasses if you have a balanced fungal to bacterial biomass ratio. Keep going now into a fungal-dominated systems. We set the stage to grow shrubs and vines. Keep increasing that fungal food. We're going to go make a deciduous forest. Mother Nature then pushes us into old growth. Nature causes this shift in plant species because of the biology, the balance of fungi to bacteria in the soil. What kind of plant do you want to grow? Figure out what the proper ratio of fungi to bacteria are to grow your plant. Make your compost such that it has the biology in it so that you don't have weeds. You get proper nutrition, all the nutrients the plant requires. Hand it to it on a silver platter. You will not run out of water. You do not have to irrigate anymore. So succession, as we go through that successional process, just an example of what those ratios would look like, typical numbers for these different systems. So we go from very nitrate-dominated systems to systems that are balanced, equal nitrate and ammonium, to systems that have more ammonium than nitrate, which is what we require for those perennial plants. How come everything on this planet is not an old-growth forest? It's called disturbance. What's the most disturbing organism on this planet? Us. So we drive things backwards. Well, nature can drive things backwards as well. So I was going to give you an example of the work that we've done with camper down compost, but I'm sorry, I don't have time. They're back there going. So I was going to talk about composting and look at those pastures. Root systems of the grasses in the first growing season that we started to work with them. The nodules on the nitrogen-fixing plants. This is where we've applied the compost and compost teas. This is the neighbor that's still in chemical growth, and you can see the difference in production. Now, that last picture was, I think, December. Here we are in April. This has been grazed 5 times. This has been grazed once. Which pasture do you want? This has been grazed 7 times. This has been grazed once. And so we regrow the pasture grasses so rapidly with so much good nutrition in them that we could really come back in and graze these pastures within 10 days after the last graze. Probably, you know, under extreme conditions that could happen.
Was that compost or compost tea?
Compost that's put out for the most part, but sometimes if the fertility doesn't seem to be quite right, they'll put out a compost tea. But they're making their own compost on the farm. And so these are the examples where in that first growing season, we reduced the costs of the growers by $200,000 on a 300-acre farm in the first growing season. If you understand biology, you never lose production. You will never go backwards in being able to graze your plants. And they increase, typically in that first year, they increase their herd size by 15%. The diseases, the problems go away. Their bricks goes from 1 to 2 up to 11 to 13. So on that note, we're going to zip through a couple other things, and there is hope. We can do this. We have done it, and we've done it all over the world. So for those of you who want to contact me, there you go. Thank you very much for your time and attention. So is that it, or do we have questions? No questions. Thanks. I'll be around all day tomorrow, so catch me in the hall.
All right, everybody, we're going to go right into the next panel.
That's it.
Okay.
All right. Do you need to talk for a minute? I understand. Is that like a frat house?
University, actually.
Yeah. Which one?
Frat house.
Witwatersrand.
Okay. Looks like a university.
I drink a lot of.
What about you?
Never mind, I'm just
Do you have a
playing.
university tie on?
No.
You got a university shirt on.
Obviously.
I don't have anything on it. Nothing on me says ASU. All right, here we go. My name is Peter Bick. I'm a filmmaker, and I also a professor of practice at Arizona State University in the School of Sustainability and the School of Journalism. So it's a real honor to be here. Alan, thank you for bringing us all here, and Daniela, and Chris, and Matt, and Trey, and everybody. We have a really, really, really cool panel here. I'm going to have a seat now. And what we're going to do is we're just going to let everyone introduce themselves, and they're going to have, since we have a truncated time, let's make it 4 minutes. You guys, is that all right? And then we'll get right into the conversations. And yeah, I'm timing it because that's just the way I am. I'm an editor, and that's what we do. So why don't we start with Richard?
Okay, I work with the Texas A&M University System as a
Dr.
research
Richard
scientist.
Teague, sorry.
And in North Texas, I'm a native of Zimbabwe, and I am trying to find out the best that we can do in terms of management to manage natural grazing lands. And I embrace holistic management because it looks at the whole, and I do my research at the whole ranch level because many issues are landscape related, and small plots do not represent what happens at the landscape. It's like putt-putt golf compared to 18-hole golf. I have done research with holistic managers. When I arrived in the States, I asked the Conservation Service to introduce me to the best conservation ranchers, and I worked with them and their neighbors to find out what impact different management has on the land, from soil microbes all the way through to economics. And I do whole ranch systems analysis to find out who actually does the best and where the weaknesses are, and hopefully from that we'll find out where we can tweak things and make them better, and take the example of the better conservation award winners and get other folk to follow them and move in the right direction. Thank you.
All right. That was much less than 4 minutes. Jason? Dr. Jason Roundtree, Michigan State University.
Evening, y'all. Jason Roundtree, certainly a pleasure to be here. I am on faculty at Michigan State University in animal science. I'm a faculty coordinator for 2 research farms that we have, one of which is located in Lake City, Michigan, which is slightly south of Traverse City, up along the 45th parallel. And then likewise, we also have a research facility up in the Upper Peninsula, northeast of Green Bay. And so I've been in a faculty environment for about 10 years and have tried to work and push our research into more of a holistic or transdisciplinary lens. Our resource base at our primary farm is going to be about 520 grazable acres. We run about 180 Red Angus, 150 to 180 Red Angus females, and do another 120 yearlings in a grass finishing system. Concurrently, we're also monitoring greenhouse gas emissions and are building towards being more apt to understand what's going on in the standpoint of soil organic carbon. And then finally, we are marrying that with the social dynamics to look at local food. And so I'm very interested. I think it's really important. I don't know if I've heard it today, but beef cattle provide a multiplier of effect of about $3 to a local economy. And so I think it's very important that we keep that economy as local as possible so those benefits stay in the community and they aren't exported other places. And so that's something that we're very passionate about. We've got some work right now we're doing where we're trying to push towards a 20% local by the year 2020 in Michigan. So ultimately we're looking at ways of trying to increase the amount of local protein through local packers and processors and retailers in that area as well.
Awesome. All right, everybody's going fast. All right, then we've got Chad Kruger from Washington State University.
Okay, I'm Chad, obviously. I work primarily in cropping systems and then other big ecosystem issues. We've started to get a little bit into rangeland and grazing systems because we see some really interesting things there. And when I say I and we, there's about 50 different scientists at WSU, University of Idaho, USDA, ARS, and Oregon State University who have all come together on what is now about 6 USDA-funded climate change research grants, looking at everything from greenhouse gas mitigation, soil carbon sequestration, and the impacts of climate change out into the future. And like I said, we've mostly worked on cropping systems, but we have branched out into rangeland systems. Probably two of the things that drive what we're doing is when you put 50 scientists together, and not all of them are together at the same time, you create a situation where you do bring out the whole and you start to ask questions about the whole. And there are reductionist scientists in there, but not everybody is a reductionist scientist. And one of the things that I think is really important, I know there's been a lot of criticism about reductionist scientists and holistic management and is it any help? And I think there's a really important point that reductionist science is really good at what it does, and that's reducing to one factor and manipulating that factor to see the effect. Obviously, that's not going to work in a very complex system. So what our group has been doing is, instead of doing the same thing over and over and over again and getting the same result that is inconclusive at best, let's try and measure it some other way. And so the two questions that I think drive what we do is, when it comes to soil carbon, can we measure it? And then can we predict it? One of my climatologist colleagues likes to say, under the context of climate change, by mid-century, we're looking at 500 parts per million or higher elevation of atmospheric CO2 and 4 to 5 degrees of temperature, depending on where you're at. The conditions are going to be very different than they are today or historically, and you can't necessarily look at the past as a good indicator of the future. So how are you going to actually predict what might happen in the future with very different environmental drivers and climate drivers affecting your soil system or your grassland system? And so we've kind of focused on two pieces of technology that are a different way of doing science. One of these is essentially whole system monitoring. So it's essentially remote sensing, but we've got some special things, what's called an eddy covariant flux tower, which basically works at field scale. And as the wind blows and air mass changes, it draws the gases, CO2, nitrous oxide, all these other gases by a sensor, and about 15 times a second reads that sensor or reads the level of that gas. And over the course of years, you get massive amounts of data about what's actually going on in that field. And if you have a sensor deployed in one field where you're managing with holistic management and in another field where you're not managing with holistic management, it doesn't really matter what the manipulations are because you can see the difference as it comes out, and it will come out solid in the data set. The second piece of this is, if you look at all other ecosystem science, it's being done with models. And so we've invested very heavily in developing models that can actually do a better job of predicting what that future might look like, because there we can play and manipulate single individual variables and say, what would they do to the other effects?
All right, thank you. And now we've got Hannah Gosnell from Oregon State University. Did I pronounce your last name right?
Yeah, close enough.
How do you pronounce it?
Gosnell.
Gosnell. Sorry, everybody. All right, go ahead.
So I'm a geographer. I'm in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at Oregon State University. I'm one of just a few social scientists there. And as a geographer, my research is on environment-society relations. And most of my research lately has had to do with the human dimensions of rangeland management. And I'm especially interested in the role that ranchers and farmers and grazers, depending where you are, can play in conservation and restoration, and also what factors influence their decision-making about how to manage land and water resources. So the kind of theories that drive my work are about resilience and adaptation and transformation and transition and social learning. And lately I've been kind of enamored with the concept of transformational adaptation, which is kind of this new body of scholarship emerging in journals like Global Environmental Change. And the reason I find it interesting is because it really applies very well to what I've seen in my research on people transitioning to holistic management. And just a quick definition, transformational adaptation is a switch to a distinct new system where a different suite of factors become important in the design and implementation of response strategies. So it's very different from incremental adaptation, which is more about kind of just doing a little bit more of the same. You know, maybe you're just going to feed a little bit more during times of drought, but you don't do anything fundamentally different. You don't address the root cause of the problem and change. So I was this growing body of scholarship, they're calling for more research on what are the factors that influence the transformation process. And there is some written about the need for technology and money and policies and information and science, and not as much, a little bit though, on some of the more non-material subjective factors that influence decision making and that play a big role in transformation, like the role of risk perception, emotions, values, identity, things like that, place attachment. And so there's some new literature on that that's pretty interesting. So I thought I'd say a little bit about what I've been trying to do along those lines. I've been funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to go out and figure out what is it that motivates ranchers to transition to climate-friendly range management, or carbon smart, you could call it carbon smart, or climate smart agriculture, or carbon-friendly ranch management, whatever. And so I did a bunch of interviews in the American West, Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, and asked people who had enrolled in the Chicago Climate Exchange's voluntary carbon program, voluntary carbon market. There are only about 1,000 ranchers across the country that enrolled. It became, the protocol was developed in 2008, and it was the whole CCX went under in 2010. But for a couple of years there, a number of ranchers enrolled, and they were generating carbon credits. They were complying with showing that they were complying with the protocol. They were generating carbon credits, and some of them made a fair amount of money. Some made $50,000, $20,000. And I wanted to go interview them and find out what was that process of. What was their experience like participating in that carbon market? What was the transition process like to have to comply with the protocol? Well, it turned out that pretty much everybody I interviewed was already in compliance with the protocol when they signed up. So they didn't have to do anything. They didn't change absolutely anything at all. So of course that has a problem for the carbon market, the whole additionality thing. There was no additionality anywhere. But still, they did it. They signed up. They got paid. But it just made me realize that these people were managing in carbon-friendly ways for a whole other set of reasons, not because they might get paid by a carbon market. So that led me to decide to go and do a little more on this and find out, well, what is it that motivates people to manage in climate-smart ways? And so in Australia, I spent a year there on sabbatical, and I interviewed a whole bunch of people. Oh, I forgot to mention, too, that the people that I interviewed mostly turned out to be holistic management people. The people that were already in compliance with the protocol were, by and large, holistic management. So that just got me interested to learn more about holistic management. So in Australia, I interviewed a number of people who were very much had been doing HM for a long time about their experiences in the transformation process. What were the things that motivated them to change? What was it like changing? What were the benefits, challenges, and so on and so forth? And it was really interesting, and I won't have time to go into all the results. I'll just say that I found definitely a common set of conditions that catalyze the transition to holistic management. And a lot of it has to do with crisis, ecological crisis, or economic crisis, or a health scare, or something like that. Also an openness, an opportunity, an exposure to holistic management, and then also it's a little bit of personality if you're open to risk and experimentation. And then secondly, the big thing is that social learning played a really big role in engaging people. And that's just about learning and sharing and experimenting with peers, and mostly between you and your HM educator, your HM consultant, and your peers that are in the class with you. That kind of social learning that people undertook really made a big difference. And the whole process of goal setting and identifying your most deeply held values, and then looking at your own actions and seeing a values behavior gap, those sorts of experiences really played a big role in getting them to change. And then I guess one final thing would be that, that I found that HM educators really seem to be incredibly effective at facilitating a particular kind of social learning, which academics call triple loop learning, which is where you're not just learning that then changes your behavior, you're not just learning that, in a way that makes you change your mental models about how the world works. You're learning in a way that makes you change fundamentally your values and norms. And when you're exposed to that kind of learning, when you experience that kind of learning, that's what sort of sets the stage for a true transformation that can last. And because now you're behaving in a way that's aligned with your norms, you're not behaving just because someone told you you should. So that social learning piece, the multiple loop learning, is a pretty interesting concept to explain why the whole process of creating your holistic context is really effective.
Cool, thank you. So, just a little bit of why I was asked to moderate this panel. I was researching a film that we're going to show tomorrow called Soil Carbon Cowboys, and I had a lot of questions about the science. Things I wanted to say in the film, but I couldn't say in the film, like this will slow down climate change, or this will get this much carbon in the soil if you do these techniques. So I met a number of scientists in that research, two of which are sitting on the stage right now, and I'm really happy to, I met Chad because we were showing our film up there a while ago, and it's really good to meet you as well. Because I'm finding the exact same stuff out as I'm filming. Everything you said, exact same stuff. But Richard's leading our team of scientists, and we're going to be doing system science. We're going to measure the whole thing, from what Elaine's talking about to plant biodiversity to animal health to rancher health. We're going to get it on a lot of different ranches and a lot of side-by-side tests. And when you do the research and you look and you look and you look for numbers of where's that carbon, what's that system doing with adaptive grazing or regenerative grazing or whatever, you come up to Richard Teague's paper. And so Richard, why don't you give us a quick overview of what that paper says and why you want more science? Why didn't you want to go to that conference in Colorado with me, right?
Okay. I worked with a group of ranchers in North Texas, and in order to contact the investigation at the landscape level, you can't replicate at the landscape level, but what you can do is compare the same 3 treatments or 4 treatments in one county and in contiguous counties, and then analyze it basically and see if they're doing the same thing. So that's what we did to bring that element of, and if there was the same response difference between the different grazing treatments, then you'd have credibility. And my original hypothesis was that degradation through bad grazing increases the soil, the amount of bare soil, and it decreases the productivity, both of which result in a loss of soil carbon, with manifold effects on the ecosystem and the earning capacity. So if you want to reverse that, you've got to manage specifically to reverse those 2 processes. You've got to decrease the bare ground, increase the plant productivity. And holistic planned grazing does exactly that. You monitor to achieve that. You have a goal that works for you, but essentially has those elements at its core. So the question was, are we seeing, if you manage to achieve those 2 things through holistic management, do you in fact get an increase in soil carbon? And in our environment, very variable in rangelands. So you have to have treatments that have been put in the same place for at least 10 years where we are, where it's drier 15, 20 years. Because in good seasons, you gain, in bad seasons, you lose. But overall, you want to see if you're getting a trend. And after 10 years, the holistic management, carried out by just regular guys without any special training, apart from the holistic management training, they had achieved much better soil carbon levels, better water holding capacity, better soil fertility. They produced more grass even though they had more cows. And that's when you put that in front of scientists, they don't believe you because those things don't happen. But in fact, when your management is good, then it does happen. Elaine said it, and it works. And we don't know where the ceiling is, so we want to carry on and find out that. But in terms of, that was in the tall grass prairie, which is relatively mesoc, but we need to know in different environments, does the same thing apply? Now, the process of science is observation, hypothesis testing, and carry on from there. So I've, right around the world, from where Alan started 48 years ago in the Karoo, 6-8 inches of rainfall. I've seen the same in the States. You can see the chaps who've managed well have improved their grass cover and everything, and they're in better shape. But what we've got to do is go and measure that now. So we want to measure dry from where we are and north. We're down in Texas where it gets pretty darn warm, and we're going all the way up to Canada to see the same sort of things happening.
And east and west as well.
Yes. Wet, dry gradient, hot, cool gradient.
Now, the numbers that you saw were basically, you saw 3,000 pounds of carbon coming into that system per hectare per year over a 10-year period. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so over 10 years, we had 30 tons of extra carbon in the soil on the holistic managed compared to the baseline, which was heavy continuous grazing on the neighboring ranches. And it was the same in the three counties.
And did the continuous grazing increase as well, just much less, or lose, or go stable?
Well, we don't know because we didn't have prior measures.
Okay.
We measured after 10 years.
Okay.
The light continuous grazing, which was the best case from a lot of scientists' point of view, it didn't do too badly, but even though it hadn't started off at a degraded state, it was still behind in terms of carbon stock in the ground compared to the rotational treatments that 10 years prior, had been in pretty beat-up condition, a lot of bare ground.
So, thank you. The issue of methane in cattle and livestock, we all know that livestock emits a lot of methane. It's a big driver of climate change, and we should take them off the land and get rid of them, right, Jason?
Wrong. Well, I think first of all, as it pertains to methane in our work, what we've been doing for the last 3 years is monitoring enteric methane from beef cows, along with soil methane, nitrous oxide emissions, and kind of looking at what that does. And I think you always have to keep these things in context because of the fact that we may go measure for 2 weeks early grazing, 2 weeks late grazing. I get over 3 meters of snow where we graze, so it's considerably different from other climates. But the bottom line is I think when you really try to frame this and put into context the overall carbon in the system, methane, in my opinion, really becomes more of a red herring in lieu of more important factors, which without question will be soil organic carbon or CO2, soil organic carbon accrual and nitrous oxide. And I think those are the main drivers, but for some reason, it seems like we're steered off the path of what really would get us there from a standpoint of altering climate change to a political issue with methane. And so that's what our work would indicate. There's times without question when we monitor that we see methane, the soils actually sink for methane. Where many of us are probably, look, 10 years ago I wouldn't have, I've learned a lot in a short period of time and am thankful for especially Terry Gompert was a person that worked with us and really got me started, and I was very thankful to get to know Terry before his unfortunate passing, I guess 3 years back. But the methanotrophs in the soil, we can certainly pick up times where the soil is a sink for methane, but it's highly affected by water, it's highly affected by soil temperature, it's affected by nitrogen, it's affected by the biodiversity, it's affected by the level of defoliation. There's all these factors that can impact those things.
But the methanotrophs are thriving in healthy soil system.
Well, one thing that I've learned, and again, I'm a trained animal science and nutritionist, but the more I've learned about the biology and the more I've read, is one thing that was very clear to me is that nitrogen fertilizer kills methanotrophs. And so here we are looking at this system, and here's a system that's ornate in the fact that we've got grazing animals and we've got controls that alter the amount of methane that goes up that can be trapped in the soil, but the decisions we make can alter that. And then when we look at it, we look at the symptoms and we say, well, methane's going up and therefore methane's bad, but we've actually made decisions that have altered what those fluxes are really doing.
Right.
Yes.
We've created systems. Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So when I've seen the most thriving grazing systems, the producers are putting a cover crop down and they're having the animals munch on that. So I'm going to let that cover crop segue into your work. Are you seeing the use of cover crops in the agricultural systems that you're studying? And what are they doing for you?
Yeah, there's beginning to be some use of cover cropping in our system. We have a little bit of a unique situation in the Pacific Northwest that we're a Mediterranean climate, so we get all our precipitation. Much of it is snow, and the rest of it mostly falls when crops or the grass doesn't grow. And so we always have this question of a trade-off between using your water for the grass or crop that you're going to grow versus using your water for a cover crop. And yet, even so, there's a lot of interest in that because there's a gaining appreciation for, I think, a lot of what Elaine was talking about earlier, that we've been pulverizing our soils in the region that we're in for 125 years. And that's relatively short compared to a lot of the rest of you, and yet we've really degraded those systems. Earlier, Alan was talking about around 10 tons of topsoil per acre being eroded. Well, in the Pacific Northwest and the Palouse, we've gone from 300 tons of topsoil per acre eroded down to 10 tons in the last 100 years. So, I mean, we have a very fragile system. It's everything Alan talks about, whether you're growing wheat or grass or irrigating and growing a vegetable or an apple. And so there is a lot of growing interest from producers around cover cropping and any other soil practice that starts to reverse that tide. And I think that's a really important factor.
Awesome. And then Hannah, I was just filming some young farmers in northwest Kansas that are teaching their parents pretty much how they want to do things. And there's a moment where the parent, the dad, 68, 69, pushing back, and the kid's sort of 27, 28, saying, no, we got to try this stuff. And it takes about a season to get the parent to sort of see the benefit. They take 40 acres and try some grazing, some different adaptive or regenerative grazing. But every time I've seen the older person go to this, they were about to go out of business. So it seems like the 20-year-olds are getting it without that crisis, but the 50-year-olds need that crisis. Are you seeing any kind of age difference in your work? Are you guys seeing that as well, that kind of split?
I think that's a good point. Most of the people I interviewed are older white men, probably in their 60s. Because I was targeting the people that were really well established, that had got into HM in the 80s, in the 90s mostly, in Australia. And I didn't really talk to any younger people there. I think that makes sense, though, that younger people are more intrigued by things that seem a little outside the box. But it's not just the crisis, it's the openness to risk and experimentation and then being exposed to something that sounds intriguing.
What about, did you interview ranchers, grazers who weren't doing it, and to find out why? Like say their neighbor's grass is green across the fence and these guys have brown grass, yet they didn't want to change. Mm-hmm. Did you interview those folks? And did you ever see like, hey, my grandfather didn't do it this way, I'm not going to do it this way? Did you find that kind of thing?
Mostly I just interviewed the HM people, but they would always often talk about their neighbors and what their neighbors thought of them and how their neighbors thought they were crazy and thought that they were wasting their grass because they'd see lots of grass there, or that they were lucky because they had less of a drought over there than they had. And an interesting phenomenon, too, seemed to be that people that lived right next door were much less likely to want to emulate their neighbor than people who are visiting from somewhere far away, because I guess there's an ego thing. You've got less at stake. If you're just visiting someone that you don't know and you see some good things, you'll go home and try them out. But if it's your neighbor, there's something about that. I think one of the most difficult things with transitioning is not wanting to admit that what you've been doing all along isn't really working out very well. Yeah. And so a big challenge is it requires a tremendous amount of humility to start practicing.
Jason, you're one of the leaders, board members, trustees of the Grass-Fed Exchange. You mentioned, is it Terry?
Terry Gompert, yes.
Terry Gompert, yeah. He helped form that. And then I was just talking to one of the members yesterday at the conference, and he was saying he's been trying to get ranchers, men to change, and he's happy to get 3 out of 100. Which reminded me of my dating ratio, just FYI. And then he started talking to the wives, and it's taken him 10 minutes. And as we've been doing our research for some other projects we're working on, like how do you get transition to happen? How do you get things to change? Every one of our meetings, moms was a post-it. Moms. Are you guys, does this ring true with any of your work? Who wants to pick that one up?
Women have a nurturing nature. Men are doers, and they don't want to change. Just about all my experience of change is the women have been the drivers of the change.
Any women in the audience today? Yep.
I think it's consistent with what we see that, in Washington we actually have a lot of women farmers, and they tend to dominate certain conferences that are more focused on sustainability issues. And then even in our more traditional ag sector, the pioneers of more sustainable approaches tend to be man and wife, and the woman is very important in that.
Oh, that's interesting. Did you see any husband and wives in your work?
Yeah.
Working together?
Mm-hmm.
And did you ask who started this? Like when you went to places that had changed?
No, but I'll say that there's at least a couple of articles that have been published, peer-reviewed literature, that definitely note that. They found that when they compared conventional to HM, there were a higher percentage of women on the HM side, more doing cell grazing, more females doing cell grazing. And I think a lot of it has to do not only with not wanting to admit you're wrong, but the ego thing might be more common in men, maybe.
Yeah, just
And,
maybe. What do you mean by that?
But also the fact that at the very beginning you have to go through this process where you have to create your quality of life statement, which requires being a little bit vulnerable and saying what you really feel and what you really want. And sometimes it's in front of other people, and a lot of times that could be a deal breaker for a lot of men.
Yeah.
And I had one. I interviewed pretty much all of the HM educators in New South Wales and Australia, and at least one of them was mentioning that if a guy showed up without his wife, he would tell him that he should really just bring his wife back, because it almost wouldn't be worth
there you go.
doing it without her there. So.
And Neil Dennis is a rancher in Saskatchewan. He says, never have more cattle than your wife can handle.
There you go. Take care of, yeah. And I think another driver on that too is the fact that inherently, I mean, if you look at a farming, if you look at a farming environment where I'm familiar, I certainly don't want to standardize differences.
In Michigan or where you're from?
In Michigan or Texas, for that matter. I mean, typically the gentlemen I work with, I mean, they are constantly thinking about, in a farming environment, if that's the main source of family income, they're thinking, well, what happens if I make these changes, and what is it going to do? Am I going to be able to pay for school next year? And so it's much more complicated. I think we're and I don't think it's a win or lose or right or wrong situation. I think we're thinking about different things and different responsibilities and roles. And if I've got to feed my family through my farm tomorrow, and I've got to look at the gross return of making these investments to alter things, and I've got to assume that level of risk, it really, I think that there's a lot of complexities that enter into it from a standpoint of adoption.
Mm-hmm. And in Pullman, like the ranchers that I'm seeing that say soil health is the primary thing, they seem to be the most successful, and they're just figuring out how to get there. I want to again bring it to the row crops that you're working on, because I want to see the parallels. I want to see, I mean, Gabe Brown does it all on his land. He does the row crops, cover crops, the cows, adding chickens, sheep.
I think in the Pacific Northwest we're an interesting phenomenon in the sense that we are so young from an agricultural perspective. The plow hit 125 to 135 years ago. If you're in parts of that region that are very thin soiled, then plow didn't even hit that till 50 years ago. And it's devastated already. Whereas in the Palouse, 300 tons of topsoil per acre, well, they just tilled it all over and kept going. And, it's some of the deepest soils in the world. And so I think we're still at a point in a lot of our region that conventional production, as destructive as it may be, hasn't actually yet cost them like it has in many other parts of the world. And so, there is a question in our region, and we're noted for being very behind the curve in terms of thinking about keeping soils covered even in our row cropping systems. But just in the last 5 years, we've started to see a real shift, and it's showing up in some of the data of, adoption of various practices that keep the ground covered.
It feels like when you say the last 5 years, last 3 years, last 6 years, I hear that a lot when I talk to people in the last 2 years. It feels like we're in that shifting time right now, and I'm an optimist, so I feel like things are going to start moving faster. Now, Richard, you've been at this for a while. I was going to say a long time. And you and I were talking about how, I forget what you said, but I used the phrase, the pioneers get the arrows, right? And then the rest of the folks come in and everything's hunky-dory. Can you talk a little bit about those arrows? Can you talk about kind of the hard stuff you've gone through being so far out in front with what you want to do, like even in your own university. I think it's very interesting to see. You're a hero of mine, and I want other people to know what you've gone through.
It's certainly there, but it's not confined to this subject. I remember when I met Russ Conser, who's an engineer, and he said in engineering and medicine and stuff like that, it's even worse, because the established order doesn't want to be shown up for having inadequacies. So it's just a natural part of being human beings. And I used to think that, okay, we'll find the guys who are really good, and then have days where we take everybody out to go and have a look at them. You know what you've just done? You've caused his situation ugly. You called it ugly. So he's not going to be a friend of yours. So that's where we need to understand the human mind and decision-making processes and changing a lot better than we do at the moment.
With your experience, what do you think are some of the better ways to handle that presentation to people who maybe in your heart of hearts, you know that they could be doing it better? What do you think are good ways to make that first impression, that first conversation?
One of the things we sit with, and it's the same as other disciplines, is the people who are opposed to you are always plugging their line and denigrating what you're doing. I mean, Ellen knows this very well. But you've got to get out there and produce the goods. At the grass-fed beef conference last year, the keynote speaker said he's not into changing people's minds. He's into working with people who've got the same goals and creating something that's really good, something that works, and then people suddenly wake up and say, yeah, that's exactly how it should be. I'm through with trying to change people's minds. I think working with folk who think the same, that's the way to go.
Jason, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think without question. I mean, and I'm thankful for Richard. I was saying today that he's kind of that lead goose in the V formation, and I'm tucked in behind him a little bit. Yeah, he's got the tenure too. So, you know, that's kind of that Richard has done. But I think ultimately, again, it comes down to a lot of social dynamics and the fact that there is a very much a status quo approach. But I think without question, if we keep on that route, we're looking at some tough situations. And, you know, being in South Louisiana for a number of years there and seeing just the impacts of the dead zone, the impacts
in the Gulf of Mexico.
Of the Gulf of Mexico.
From the nitrogen coming down the Mississippi
Sure,
from all the farms.
Sure, and not only that, but the more increasing devastation of hurricanes because of the fact we've lost our marshes due to saltwater intrusions and things of that nature. And so, but it isn't easy, and it's not going to be. And I think, unfortunately, it may take more eye-opening experiences to...
You're thinking along the lines of crises are going to wake people up? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, yeah.
Weather events?
Well, I think, or financial events as well. And, you know, it depends. In many countries, our policies prop up conventional ag.
In this country?
No,
in that country. Sorry. Just flew in today.
And so, you know, is that support always going to be there? Mm-hmm. And if it isn't, what are these models going to look like when, you know, you're under $2 or $3 on a bushel of corn? You're under $2 or $3. It could change dramatically, I think.
Well, let's talk about corn. Is there a holistically managed way to grow corn? Is there a beneficial way to grow corn? And I'll just wedge in a little thing that I learned from Jerry Hatfield at Iowa State. He said in Iowa, for every pound of corn grown, they lose a pound of carbon in the soil. They lose a pound of soil, actually. For every pound of corn grown, they lose a pound of soil. Does that sound right?
Sounds probably fairly realistic.
For the Great Plains,
For the Great Plains.
the amount of soil that's lost due to erosion is 6-fold higher than the crops that are produced in the same area. 6-fold.
Okay.
In biomass.
And we'll come back to you on this because you've got stuff to say here. On the corn, is there a healthy way to grow corn?
So the traditional way that corn was produced in the Americas was corn, bean, and squash grown together. It's called the Three Sisters. It's a phenomenal system.
Corn,
beans, and squash.
Okay.
The bean provides nitrogen into the system. The corn is a stalk for the bean to grow up, and the squash suppresses all the weeds.
At the same time.
At the same time. Now, the challenge with that system, obviously, if you think about it, is it's kind of anti-mechanization.
Right.
And so, but the question of can a system be designed with agroecological principles in mind like that and still use mechanization? Yes, we can do that.
Have you seen any machines that could take care of that
You wouldn't necessarily do it in the context of same in space and time. You might change space and time through rotation, but models like that in cropping system have been developed, have been used, are phenomenally effective, and can be used with modern mechanization.
I'm going to ask you a question in a second about crops with cattle, with livestock, but Richard, talk about corn from the perspective of the life cycle analysis of beef production and erosion and how that plays a factor.
We're in the process of writing a paper now to put into context. Everybody's chirping about the greenhouse gas footprint of beef cattle. So we're looking at a greater context. We're looking at the whole of agriculture and looking at the GHG's footprint of every phase of it. Corn is by far the highest, followed by soil erosion, and beef production is way, way, way down the list. So if you look at it from that view looking at the whole thing, all these papers that just concentrate on the beef animal, I think, are agenda-driven. When you look at the whole context of what you're dealing with, i.e. feeding the world, you've got to step back a little bit and find out what's really happening. Where are these bad things happening? And we're in the process of putting a paper together now. We're just ready to hand it in.
And so that's some science that's going to come out of this team.
And this is all common knowledge. We used EPA figures and Rattan Lowell's erosion figures and stuff like that.
Just connecting dots.
Yeah.
That's all you're doing.
The data's there. People are just looking at a little sliver of window, usually associated with the agenda that they're trying to push.
Right.
And we've got to educate people that, no, look at the big picture, and then we'll figure out what's the right thing to do.
We did the math, Richard and I, and we added up the amount of total corn, beans, and hay harvested based on USDA data. And I think it was like we export considerably more topsoil than we produce corn, beans, and hay.
And
so
that
we're
doesn't
farming
produce
our
any
topsoil
income.
more so. And so that's a bad thing, right? And so ultimately, there's been a multitude of LCAs that are continually coming out. There's some that have gotten a lot of press just very recently, which basically says that pigs and chickens are good, feedlots are good, grazing cows are bad. And the first thing I always do when I look at LCA is I go to the PDF and I Google erosion, I Google carbon, and I Google topsoil or in the PDF search. And typically they may show up once, if not at all. And so here we are, we're again symptomatic in our approaches. We're looking at the emissions, but we don't look at the sinks. We don't look at what's going on. And I would say that any LCA that does not include topsoil and includes soil carbon within it is not an LCA. It's a manifestation of an imagination.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing we've got to really keep in mind.
It's poetic.
And it begs the question, okay, so what's the solution? Well, the solution to all that soil loss is, guess what? Permanent cover. What covers the ground? What eats that cover? So cattle are actually part of the solution. And we just got to figure out how to make these things work in a less damaging way.
And at scale.
Yeah.
Did you see any ranchers that were growing their cover crops, that were working on growing row crops with their cattle? Did you see any co-production there?
Yeah, there's this one person in Australia, Col Seiss, who's doing that pasture cropping, who's become a rock star, famous for that, and it's spreading all over Australia, the idea. I don't know how much it's being taken up here, but...
We're going to hear from Joel Salatin in just a little bit. I think he's going to tell us a little bit about that. I know we're supposed to be done right now, but I'm going to call an audible. I think we should have a couple of questions from the audience. Can you guys hang with that? I know. How about just a couple of questions from the audience? Because I know when I'm in the audience, I always know there's folks with questions. And then we'll finish up. We're half an hour late? Okay, I'm going to call an audible on my audible. And we can all talk to each other. These guys are all,
we're around.
Yeah. You're all around. So let's give an applause to these scientists on the front lines. So now we've got, I'm just going to introduce the next guy. So you guys can clear out. Justin, do you want a podium, or do you want it on your lap, or? Okay. Cool. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Justin Adams, former BP executive, and now working with the Nature Conservancy. And you'll tell him the rest. And this should be able to turn on with
the adapter.
Awesome.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm conscious it's late. I'm kind of intrigued at how hard Savory works, everybody, to stay so late into the evening. But I'm delighted to be here. My name is Justin Adams. I'm the Global Managing Director for Lands at the Nature Conservancy. Whilst we're figuring out how to hook up the computer, I will introduce the Nature Conservancy. So for our non-North American audience, the Nature Conservancy is not really known outside of, or certainly not very well known in Europe. It's the largest environmental organization in the world. It has about 4,000 employees. It has a very rich history of science. It's got about 550 scientists working in the Conservancy. And we work in 39 countries around the world, but by far our largest footprint is in North America. As the title suggests, then most of the work that we've done is focused on conserving land. And over the 60-year history of the Conservancy, we've conserved more than 120 million acres of land around the world. So that is the core purpose of what the Conservancy does. It's to protect the land and waters on which all of life depends. So that's what we're all about. So what's an environmental organization doing talking at the Savory Institute, given all of this polarized debate around the role of cattle and the role of beef in the world? And it's simply that we're on a journey as well to understand what the role of livestock is and how we can actually be embracing that as part of our conservation mission going forward. So in addition to having the conservation lands that we manage around the world, it's clear that in many, many cases, is this going to work? We also work with, is this going to work? With working lands. So we manage, and nobody quite knows, but we manage well in excess of 100,000 acres of ranch lands around the world, with many beef on that land. The reason we've run that is because they're working lands. We've got to figure out how we make some of those lands pay, but we're trying to do that in a way that enables us to achieve the conservation benefit. But historically, that's been to try and drive to get biodiversity benefit off that land. So a lot of the science that the Conservancy has traditionally done has been conservation science to monitor biodiversity and monitor the environmental health of the lands in which we work. It hasn't been to drive deeply into the soil science or how much carbon is sequestered into that soil. And that's the critical work that we're going to need to do moving forward to actually be able to put some substance behind the claims around what we can do with holistic grazing or with sustainable land management. So the Conservancy has worked with Savory now for the last 2 years. We're in the middle of a 3-year partnership, but we've been working to try and bring some of the conservation science into the holistic management work. I'm going to have to flick through a few slides here to catch up with where I am. So that's who we are, the land we protect. And we work with lots of ranch land. Maybe just pause on this for a minute. There's still an awful lot of environmental scientists and conservation scientists who are still really kind of scratching their heads as to why on earth we're working more and more with cattle and with beef production, given its supposed degradation of land and the evil that it causes. So, this is what we're managing internally. It's what you're all managing sort of externally as well. The reality is livestock and cattle is on a huge footprint of the world. right? 8.4 billion acres is the size of Africa. Now, there's 1.5 billion cattle, and if you just take the FAO numbers, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization's numbers, then livestock in total, not just cattle, is responsible for about 18% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's easy to see with those kind of numbers why people point holes at the livestock sector, and beef in particular, as being a big part of the problem and something we need to change. And depending on definitions, an awful lot of that land is degraded. Clearly, there's huge degrees of levels of degradation. So the work we're doing is focused on 3 ranches. This is a 14,000-acre ranch we have in eastern Colorado called the Fox Ranch. The reason we were originally there is to protect this very critical watershed. It's an incredibly high biodiversity watershed with about 2,000 species in the water. But it's a working ranch. It's also got some incredible biodiversity in terms of the prairie grasses that are there. And so this is one of the 3 ranches we've been working with Savory on. What we've actually found there, the interesting thing, again, as an environmental organization, is we're not necessarily the strongest business people in the world. And the biggest, one of the biggest sort of improvements for us is actually having seen a 60% increase in stocking rates over the 2-year period we've been working this. We've also seen something, an increase in sort of 80% of actually the financials that we're getting off the ranch from employing a holistic or a planned grazing system. So again, you're bringing the environmental approach where we're protecting all this biodiversity with the financial approach, which is also part of the whole system. So that's starting to sort of get people to wake up a little bit, because we've got ranches across North America. We also work with cattle and beef operations in many other parts of the world, in Mongolia and China, in Australia, in Patagonia, and in Africa. Then suddenly, how do we actually start to, if we're able to achieve more revenue off the land, then we're actually going to be able to achieve bigger environmental wins as well. So the science is starting to prove out, and the biodiversity has actually also increased on this ranch. So the prairie chicken population has actually also increased from 73 breeding pairs to 112 breeding pairs over that same period of time. So we're getting an environmental benefit, we're getting a financial benefit. And with the financial benefit, we get a social benefit, because we can employ more people on the ranch, and rural employment is key. So that's the type of work that we're doing with Savory there. I want to sort of just give you a couple of other examples. So this is some work we're doing in northern Kenya. This is working with the local tribespeople. The intent is, over the next few years, that we scale a model of conservancies, where we're actually putting the land management in the hands of the local peoples. And we are expecting to be on 10 million acres of land, working with a phenomenal local NGO there called the Northern Rangelands Trust. So a huge footprint, and it's actually also one of the locations for a Savory hub now. One of the things that we're doing is also linking, we've put some very innovative impact capital at work here to link these farmers through to the market, so that there's a better payback for the farmers. So we buy the cattle from the pastoralists. We then take it to a conservancy to actually fatten up the cattle, and then we're actually also now building a slaughterhouse to be able to provide a route to market for these farmers. So again, huge social benefit, huge environmental benefit in terms of the biodiversity, and what we are also doing there, which we're not doing in Fox, is a soil carbon project. So we're actually starting to get real measurement on the soil carbon benefit, and the biggest. So that's going to throw out data in the years ahead. So overall, we're moving increasingly as a conservancy to think about whole landscape approaches. We're looking at not just the restoration of habitat and the biodiversity, we're looking at the whole system that we're trying to work with. What's the social benefit, the environmental benefit, and the financial benefit here. This is a picture from the Ovis 21 network in Argentina, who we've been working with now for a number of years, and are hoping to be on 4 million hectares by 2015 to reverse some of the the very destructive grazing practices to employ a more sustainable grazing practice again. And again, there's another site for a Savory hub, and we can see the benefits of putting these types of practices to work on the ground. Again, this is about the science. The science has got to underpin this. We've also got to look at innovative finance. So in this case, we've actually engaged Patagonia. So Patagonia is now paying for some of the wool to come off that holistically grazed land. And also in many of the countries we're working, how do we shape policy to actually enable this type of practice? So I think this hopefully sort of outlines the opportunity that's out there to start linking or bringing some of these different players, different actors together. I would say it's not a done deal at all that everybody in the Nature Conservancy buys that we should be embracing livestock and embracing beef in a substantial way, because the vast majority of folk in the Conservancy are sort of various shades of green. I guess everybody's a shade of green, but many are quite deep green. And there are a fair number of vegans who still think that beef are not necessarily the type of activity that we should be working with. But increasingly, as we think about how we work and how we can increase our footprint overall, then this is the type of work we're going to need to do more and more of. The big question for me, because climate is another critical issue that we are wrestling with. The big question is, how can we substantiate the soil carbon discussion? It's remarkable to me how, given its potential importance, how little science has actually occurred to do this. It was interesting that the panel we just had, there was not a single scientist from Europe. I was up at a session probably a year or so back up at Cranfield University with the leading soil scientists of the UK, decrying the sort of, the lack of funding they've had over the years, and that now for the first time in decades there is not a single fellow in the Royal Society who has got any experience in soil. Soils are so important for all the reasons the panel before has just talked about. How we work with soils, both for arable systems and for pastoral systems, are so important, yet we don't fund it. So we've got to figure out how we bring more funding to this and how we can then scale these types of solutions, not just for the carbon piece, but for livelihoods, for broader environmental benefits. And we've got to move from this polarized debate that somehow beef is the problem or beef is the answer. We've got to work and manage the lands and the soil on which we all depend for all of our life in a far better way going forward. So I will end there with the title, which I don't know where it came from, but I love the proverb anyway, of we will go a lot further if we go together and we join up some of the different parties and different stakeholders who are critical to get there. Thank you all. Questions, or probably you're so late anyway, you probably don't want me to take any questions. It's up to you. No questions.
All right, so now Lisa is going to introduce Joel, and she's got a special treat for us.
I believe that words are very, very powerful. Imagine if the millions and millions of people around the world today stopped using the word sustainable and started using words like regenerate, rejuvenate, and reboot. Maybe we could, do we want to just maintain and sustain where we are today, or do we want to regenerate our landscapes, rejuvenate our soils, and rejoice in abundance for all? Good afternoon, my name is Lisa Heenan. I'm a director of Agrarians. Agrarians is an Australian-based non-profit that delivers globally adaptive education and produces media that celebrates positive working examples of the regenerative economy in action. For over 20 years, we have been invited by communities and producers around the world to help them to regenerate their landscapes, their local economies, and most importantly, their soils. As a producer, you have to deal with the geography and the climate in your region. As Darren says, the climate of the mind is the hardest thing to change. So with that knowledge, we decided to extend our attention to the greater public. We decided to make a documentary to reach out to those consumers. We wanted to help fast-track the reboot, the critical reboot of our civilization. So we went to Polyface Farms. We wanted to highlight the beauty, healing power, and holistic integration of regenerative production systems. We started 3 years ago, and last week we finished. We'd like you to sit back and enjoy the trailer for our documentary, Polyfaces.
The second step can only come after taking the first step. How do we make a change? If you really are passionate about this, the first step is up to you, and the second step
and through that save our cities and everything else, we're going to have to return to farmer creativity. And I believe that the moment that policies are developed holistically, we will do that.
What makes this farm so different? I think it's all of the symbiotic relationships that mimic nature. You've got cows that are eating grass, you've got chickens that follow them and scratch through their manure eating bugs, then you've got turkeys following them eating bugs. You go up into the forest and you've got pigs, then you come down and you've got people buying their food directly off the farmer, and then you've got all these young people who are learning off masters.
It's not just the work he's doing and the creativity, but it's the sense of community. It's a very human sort of place. And I just love that sense of community here.
Farmers around began to see and realize that we were doing things a little differently than they were. They all thought we were kind of crazy, not plowing and planting and raising corn like they did.
It's immediately clear that this is different than other farms. The sheer quantity of life on this place.
Somebody's going to have to open our eyes and say, yeah, what he's doing is great, and it's building our country back up.
In 5 minutes, I can show you 10 things that Grandpa would have given his eye teeth to have. We are not anti-technology. What we like is technology that allows us to better biomimic the patterns. Dad just looked me in the eye and said, I just want to know, you really want this place for your life? I said, yes. And he said, I will never even think about selling this place again. You'll never hear it again. He never did.
You've got your blood family, but you can also have this incredible support group family that can be people you work with or people that support you, and that family can be huge. The way we figure it, the new frontier for us has been the people. managing the people that are coming to see, handling the people that want to get involved, the interns, the apprentices, people grouping themselves based on belief.
I think it's important to be involved in the entire circle from when you have them as chicks to the very end, because I can ensure that they have the highest quality of life throughout the entire process.
Farming tends to be kind of viewed as a man's world, but in reality, it's men and women working together to make it happen.
I'm convinced that there are a lot of people who, if they really thought they could, would do this.
If you don't have the character to do what it takes to get it done, then you need to just go get a factory job and show up when the boss says to show up and leave when the boss tells you to leave.
My mom is an incredible person and just has constantly been the one picking up the pieces.
Boy, the future. We don't know where we're going to be in 10 years. We don't know where we're going to be in 5 years. We just know that we're going to have to keep a good, supportive team behind us, around us, in front of us at all times, and see where it goes.
I don't know what our kids are going to do yet. Right now they're just, killing bad guys and slaying dragons and things like that, but I hope, just like I caught that desire from my parents, I hope that at least one of them will catch that desire from me.
People across the world are copying what's going on here, and this farm is breeding a whole new kind of entrepreneur.
I like to call it living food. I grow it all the way through, I harvest it. It's hard to change people, but when you get good food in their mouth, they want to change themselves. I'm friends with chefs, and every one of them is jealous that I get to pick each tomato hand-picked that I will be using.
We use 90% of our produce from the local community. We change the menu at least every week, and it's based on the product coming in.
It's healthy. You don't have to go on a diet when you eat delicious food. Sometimes people say, oh, a diet means bad tasting food. For me, a diet is a lifestyle, just as my job is a lifestyle, and we eat really healthy and it's delicious. There's no better food.
We need a regenerative agriculture that can sustain civilization. If you can get one idea that could turn everything around, if we could get everybody agreeing that management needs to be holistic. No scientist can argue against that and say, no, it needs to continue to be reductionist. So you've got a point on which everybody could agree.
Keep it decentralized and keep empowered people autonomous to create their own income packages and what they like to do.
Joel has always been kind of an out-of-the-box thinker.
If the Lord wants you to do this, He'll bring customers to you. And I said, let's try it and see.
I oversee the buying clubs. That's kind of been my baby. I took it over from Uncle Art when it was about 30 people, and it was a perfect job for a new mom. It's grown to being from about 30 families to a little over 5,000 families.
The food movement is, about a lot more than food. It's really about community, and food has always been a way for forging community.
I think the farther away we get from the natural world that we evolved to exist in, the worse off we're going to be.
Once I found out that they were delivering, a couple miles from my house, I was all over it.
I would like to see more people be responsible for their own actions, not trying to point the blame to somebody else. You did this to me. Well, it's what you're putting in your body, and it's what you are doing and what you're doing to your kids and you're doing to your economy and environmentally.
We were blind to it for my entire time growing up, for 45 years. I didn't think about it. I just went to the supermarket like everyone else and picked up the package and assumed that things were always right with the world.
Most of us eat thoughtlessly, and then that's how we got into this trouble.
People are just waking up because there's just all over. People are finding out about what's happening to our food system.
And the more they learn, the more they seek out different kinds of foods, and they eventually find their way to a farmer like Joel.
And then you start feeling better, which makes you have more energy for your family and to do more things, and you can't afford not to do it.
The idea that we could take beautiful food off the land and heal it at the same time, that's a very hopeful lesson, because it's bigger than food or farming. It suggests that as long as the sun shines, there is a free lunch, and that you can capture that energy and run it through a system and not diminish the world.
We're losing breeds, we're losing cultures, we're losing languages, we're losing all this stuff under this mechanistic type of thing we call science today. So yes, we need science, but we also need common sense.
What we've seen here is the future face of our food system, how we grow it, buy it and eat it. And it really could be the thing that saves us.
This repopulating the land with farmers who build community is extremely gratifying.
You need people on these farms to run them and do them successful. And I think Joel's way is going to be the future.
You get the symbiosis of all those nests being in proximity. Now you've got a bunch of songbirds that are really singing some hallelujahs, and that's exciting.
Thank you. We are asking for our global community to support us, so if anyone would like to support us in any way, please come and see me afterwards. I'd like to introduce one of my most favourite people in the whole world, and our very dear friend, Joel Salatin.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, it's great to be with you, and I will try to pick up some time. Is that okay, Chris? We'll pick up some time here. What an honor to be here with all of you and to share this spot with the wonderful group of, oh my, what a stellar lineup here. I'm feeling full, aren't you? I mean, wow, this is great. So I'm going to concentrate now on how to inspire a new generation of farmers. Teresa and I got married. We had a dream of farming, and we said, well, what do we really want? And one of the things that we really wanted was, I said, well, back up a little bit. I grew up in this family where we didn't have family around us. We'd been in Venezuela for a decade and fled there when the guerrillas came in a junta, and Dad lost everything and came back to the U.S. And so we lived in Virginia, and Mom grew up in Ohio, Dad grew up in Indiana, and so I grew up without any family, cousins, nobody around. Teresa, my wife, is related to everybody in the county, and she's multi-generation there. Family goes way, 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 way back. And I really coveted that for our future, and appreciated deeply her relationships with her grandparents and extended cousins and families. And so when we said, well, what kind of a farm do we want? I said, well, I want a farm that when I get old, the only argument on the farm is the grandchildren arguing over who gets to spend the day with grandma and grandpa. And I'm happy to report today that we have 4 generations on the farm. You saw Mom, she turned 90 in December and is very active and healthy and dances and sings and drives and does all those kind of things. And then, of course, Teresa and I are there. Daniel's there with Sherry. And our grandchildren, our daughter lives just 10 minutes away in town. But the point is that we do have 4 generations on the farm. That's one of the most blessings of my life. So we have grown to this point in our life when the dream of our grandchildren's voices mixing with the songbirds outside has been true. Stephen Covey says, before you can build something, you have to start with the end in view. And so today we're surrounded by 4 generations, collaborators, staff, apprentices, and interns, and you saw a lot of them. So I've gotten to age with all this enthusiastic young energy around. And as we have launched numerous apprentices and interns into their own operations, and I've seen them be successful, I've looked around and I've kind of thought, well, what is it? What are some of the common threads that we see in these successful launches of these young people? Because you see, in the U.S. at least, the average farmer is now almost 60 years old. We have some pretty daunting. We've heard about land degradation all day, and that's fantastic. But the other degradation is the wealth of information and knowledge and ability that we're losing from our rural communities and the economies in our rural communities. We like to call ourselves at Polyface the reverse economy. We're moving wealth from the city back to the country instead of being part of the colonialism of America, where we're moving wealth from the country to the city. We even have a reverse rush hour where people come from the city and work at the farm instead of from the farm working in the city. The fact is that if young people can't get in, old people can't get out. And so we have to have ways for young people to get in. We have to have models that allow young people to get in. So I've just jotted down several kind of constant things that we've seen and thought about and developed at our place to try to create germination trays and abilities in, pathways in for young people. Let me go through them very quickly. The first one is that every farm has more opportunities than you can imagine. Now, this is a climate of the mind. Trust me, the average farmer in our area, they think they've maxed out their farm. And if you go to them and say, did you know that you could quadruple production and quintuple income on this place? Oh no, I'm already working 80 hours a week. I'm 60 years old. What do you want me to do? And the thought that they could layer or stack or synergize or symbiose, I don't think that's a word, but create additional opportunities that their farm is not filled. Nothing could be further from their mind. They think they're working to death, and it's fully, it's fully productive. But the fact is that there's not a farm in the world, not yours, not mine, not any, in my opinion, and that I've seen, that is completely full of its possibilities. When I was with Lisa and Darren and did some of this in Australia, one of the brainstorm sessions we did, those of you who are from Australia, you'll appreciate this, I think. You know how many sheep sheds there are? You have to say that slowly when you're up here. You have to be very deliberate. Sheep shed. Okay. Shearing sheds that there are in Australia that are vacant, lots of them. And so one of the exercises that we would do, brainstorming, is just brainstorm can anybody think of things that we could do with a defunct, idle sheep shearing shed? And you would not believe the clever ideas, from growing mushrooms underneath to craft fairs to woofer housing to art shows and cooking classes. And I mean, nobody was talking about regulations. We were just brainstorming, okay? And it was amazing. And the fact is that your farm and mine, that our farms are incredibly underutilized and underfilled. And so on our place, as you saw some there in the thing, we have the grazing cows, and we come behind them with the egg mobiles, and we have the meat birds, the broilers, and then you have the turkeys, and you have the Millennium Feather Net, and all this happens on the same acreage as complementary enterprises. So where the average farm in our area generates one income, it takes over 500 acres to generate one income, we average an income every 25 acres. Where the average farm generates $200 an acre in income, we generate almost $10,000. And what that means is suddenly there is a place for the next generation. The average farm child grows up coveting the neighbor's land, because the only way to make room for a second salary is to expand horizontally. We have cows, we need more land for more cows. Have a cherry orchard, we need more land for more cherry trees. We have a wheat farm, we need more land to grow wheat. And so the average child grows up coveting the neighbor's land if they want to farm in order to generate enough income for them. What I'm suggesting is that the opportunity's already there. We're not even beginning to utilize it. We've got a ton of salaries. So one of the things that Dad and I did very early in the game was we sat down and brainstormed how many salaries could this farm produce. And back then, we weren't renting any land. We were just, I don't even think Teresa and I were married yet. I was maybe in late high school. And so we picked out a piece of paper. We just brainstormed. I still have that little yellow sheet of paper in a file today. And at that time, 40 years ago, we brainstormed 25 salaries off of what was our little 100 acres of open land that we could do. The fact is, farmers they're not encouraged to think like their land could produce this number of salaries, aren't they? They don't think this way. They're like Stephen Covey. They're coming at it from an assumption of scarcity rather than plenty. And so when we start stacking enterprises and we create complementary enterprises on the land base, suddenly the opportunities are just enormous. And we begin to realize we can assimilate and metabolize. This is one of the things that we've come to now on our farm. Basically, we are limitless in the number of farmers that we can have on our place, let alone the neighbors or anybody else's. Why? Because it's limitless based on the creativity of the things somebody wants to bring to it. We could have a full-time woodworker, a full-time you could go up and all the grapevine prunings, instead of being compost, those prunings could make grapevine wreaths. If you were artistic, you could make those into pretty wreaths that you would sell to people for their doors, and things from honey to aquaponics to fish to recreational to orchard to vineyard. It never ends. And then when you start getting all those people, then you could have somebody employed fully to babysit people's kids on some sort of rotation. This year we added a farm mechanic for the first time. You can add lots of different things. A person who does everybody's sewing, projects. My goodness, you get enough opportunities, and you could have a full-time theatrical director for performance that you give for agritourism. When I say opportunities on the farm, I'm not saying that everybody is out, pulling the udder and milking. I'm talking about lots of synergistic complementary pieces that all work complementary to make the whole. So first of all, to just come to the piece of land, come to the farm with the notion, man, I can't even imagine what could fill this up. That's a big deal. You can't do what you can't imagine. I told the first group, our weak link is not money, it's not resources, it's not location. Our weak link is constipation of imagination. And we can't do what we can't imagine. So I just encourage all of us. You don't have to write down all these things, but just realize there's more opportunity. Number 2, portable infrastructure. Portable infrastructure. We have, as you saw there, we have put a lot of time and attention on trying to create portable infrastructure, because I believe that one of the biggest impediments for young people beginning to farm is the capitalization cost of land and infrastructure. However, if we can make a farm, think about this. What differentiates a farm or ranch from a national park or a wilderness area or a national forest? I'm talking about locked up land, okay? Basically, environmentalism by abandonment. Got to get on my soapbox once in a while. Okay. What differentiates those two pieces of land? What differentiates them is what a person, a farmer or a rancher, has done to that landscape. That's one of the problems with the land preservation efforts worldwide, is that they've tried to preserve land, they've tried to preserve farms without preserving farmers. And if you don't preserve farmers, you don't have farms. The barn falls down, the silos, decompose, the fences go down, it all goes back to whatever, and you have nothing. And so when we have portable shelters, portable infrastructures, portable abattoirs, portable basically everything, suddenly we can separate the cost of the land from the farm. Because it's the infrastructure, it's the creativity of the things, the equipment, the buildings, the mechanisms there, electric fence, whatever, that the farmer brings to the landscape that makes it vibrant, that turns it from a wilderness to a pastoral landscape, all right, a managed landscape, actually far more productive. I think it's a pretty big leap of faith, if I could just do a little subnote here. I think it's a pretty big leap of faith to just assume that nature functions best without humans. I think that's a leap of faith. To assume that the way all the ravines and the valleys landed after the last whatever is the best. That whatever way raindrops fall off the surface and move is the best. We've done a lot of rape and pillage and conquistadors, mentality. That's right. But our reaction to that should not be to abandon this bad, relationship that we've created, but to rather repent, confess, and then begin to embrace and participate in a remediative way with this relationship with earth. And so, what the neat thing about portable infrastructure is that it allows us to farm nooks and crannies. I call this nook and cranny farming. Suddenly, with portable infrastructure, you can go up and down the road and you can farm all these little abandoned little nooks and crannies. You don't have to own the land. That's a huge, positive thing. Number 3, multiple use infrastructure. We got portable infrastructure, but if we're going to build infrastructure, we want multiple use. We don't want to have single use. So we don't want single-use big confinement animal operations. If we're going to have livestock housing, we want to make the structure so that it can have different kind of species at different times or at the same time. And we have hoop houses where we have plants in the tall tunnels, plants in the summer. We have cows, pigs, and chickens all in the same place in the wintertime. Chickens up above on portable mezzanine floors that we move in. I mean, this is cool, And you're using all the cubic footage and all this diversity and cacophony of different speciation creates confused pathogens. And confused pathogens are a good thing. What are we in? A cow house or a pig house or a chicken, and they don't know, so they can't become virulent. See? And so we get all this production from a multiple use structure. It includes equipment. You can take a little 4-wheel drive tractor and hang implements on the front and the rear, all sorts of things. Don't get a single use piece of equipment. The little Italian the BCSs and the El Goldanis, I think that's the little diesel one, right, in Italy. Italy, the average farm in Italy is 12.5 acres, and so they've got all these little two-wheel walk-behind tractors, and you can get little miniature round balers and all sorts of cool stuff, with these little walk-behind tractors. The beauty of this, America, the U.S. has 35 million acres of lawn and 35 million acres housing and growing food for recreational horses. That's 70 million acres. That's enough to feed the whole country without a single farm or ranch. When people talk about we're running out of food, we can't feed the population, they're not thinking about all the abandoned land. Cornell University did a 2-year study a couple of years ago, and they took a 15-year period from 1995 to 2010 and said, let's find out how many acres of abandoned farmland New York now has. This is not converted land. This is not to strip malls or expressways or subdivisions or whatever. This is simply active farmland 15 years ago, and now it's simply inactive. It's been abandoned. In New York State alone, 3.1 million acres. This is not even desert. This is good land. Okay? Really good land, really some of the most productive land in the world. 3.1 million acres. We had an intern from upstate in Ithaca. He finished with us. He went home. Within 30 days of going home, 3 different people came to him that owned tracts of land totaling 1,000 acres and said, would you please come and do something with this land? You don't have to pay me any rent, no leasing, no nothing. Just please do something with it so it doesn't just grow up in forest. And there are millions of those kinds of acres. So multiple use infrastructure. Number 4, start with the smallest viable entity. You know, we are taught, aren't we, to dream big. You know, we have these sayings, if your dream can be accomplished in your lifetime, then it's not big enough. And we got all these wonderful things, you know, about being big, you know, and we talk about it's got a scale and all this stuff. Well, what we've found is that our successful farming friends and people that have gone and done successful are the ones who have figured out how to make it profitable at the slowest prototypical embryo. And I think we do ourselves a disservice sometimes when we paint this broad brush that, man, if it's not big, it just doesn't, it just won't get the job done. You know, if it's not big, you know what? If it's not little first, it can't be big next. And what we'd better do is figure out how to nook and cranny farm and be viable in our little backyards and subdivisions and get that settled. Then we can scale. How many people grew too fast? My dad used to call this overrunning their headlights. He was an accountant. He said businesses don't fail because they're not big enough or because they don't have a product. They fail because they grow too fast. What's going out the back door is faster than what's coming in the big door. You got front door, big door. You got to cash flow it, you see, and you work out all those little cash flow and business nuances, small scale. We were actually working with a prototype just recently, and we were struggling with trying to make a business plan work for this particular enterprise. And finally, Daniel, my son, he's smarter than I am. He said, you know, we've been sitting here trying to see how we can make this flow at scale. Let's see how we can make it, how small we can make it and still make it flow. Suddenly, it was a breakthrough, and it worked. Embryonic prototypes have always been the way innovation comes to the marketplace. And so asking how small can this be done is great. And I wouldn't be honest to myself or my ministry if I didn't have a mention here about regulations and food safety kinds of regulations that impede innovation. You know, we have an orthodoxy of, Alan was talking about that eloquently this morning, of how the bureaucracy and the entrenched, you know, powers that be, you know, create an orthodoxy. And so those of us who are heretics, not only do we not find a place at the table, Alan, I'd go one step further, you know, we get burned at the stake. You know, we get the arrows, okay? Because innovation is always threatening to the entrenched status quo, isn't it? I mean, you know, what happens to the buggy whip makers when people start driving Model Ts? I mean, this is a problem. And so this is why we desperately need to carve out in our developed countries. This is not a problem in the undeveloped world. You know, those people are very glad to get the food that's illegal for me to sell. But in our developed world, where we've become so sophisticated and techno and become so disconnected from food that the average consumer is paranoid about food and scared and demands governmental oversight and protection to protect me from dirty farmers and dirty businesses and dirty corporate, all this stuff. It's symptomatic of paranoia toward food. See? And so I can't trust myself. I mean, our customers call us and say, if I thaw out this chicken, I mean, you know, they've made this huge lifestyle transition from getting, you know, frozen TV dinner chicken nuggets, microwavable, to buying a whole chicken from us that they have to cook. And they call us and say, will this get salmonella if I thaw it out? People are scared of food. What have we come to when people fear food? In undeveloped countries, you know, the third world, they're not scared of food. They know food. They know what it looks like if it smells bad, looks bad, tastes bad, feels bad. You know, they understand food. They know what milk smells like when it spoils, stuff like that. I mean, what we've done is we've become so disconnected from our umbilical, as if we can levitate somewhere above being dependent on something as mundane as the earth. To where, you know, in our country, the average person drinks white bovine secretions that have been so manipulated, they don't even go sour. Nobody even knows what it smells like anymore. You know, all the research is in not how to make it more nutritious or taste better or more, you know, vitamin-centric. Rather, it's how do we make it shelf-stable so it will never rot, you know? We don't want cheese that stands on the table and gets mold on it. Why? Oh, no, what is that stuff crawling over there? We want Velveeta, you know? You squirt it out, it stands up out of a tube, you know? Cheese in it, there's something wrong about cheese in the tube. That ain't right. And you can leave it for a year and it doesn't get mold, it doesn't do anything. Well, let me tell you something. If it won't rot, it probably won't digest. And so the techno-sophistication and the air of our culture in which people, you know, don't bother me with food, just put it in the microwave, you know. Has created this scenario where now we have layer upon layer upon layer of what I call the food police. It's also called the Orthodox Food Inquisition, to where those of us who dare to drink raw milk and want to sell, homemade pickles and homemade charcuterie and whatever else. Name your poison. Those of us who want to do that, you know, we're branded heretics, and that's denied. So the problem is that the regulatory framework scales very well up, but it doesn't scale very well down. If you have to have a $2,000 thermometer to get a HACCP plan passed to do charcuterie, that $2,000 thermometer is nothing if you're doing a tractor trailer load at a time. But if you're doing it in a 5-gallon bucket, it's a different deal. Are you with me? So that's where the requirements. So we desperately need to be able to preserve the ability of innovation of embryonic prototypes, because if the regulatory structure and the thought structure makes every embryo too large to be birthed, the dreams of millions of farmers to come with an antidote to the problems of our food system cannot be birthed, because the embryo has to be birthed too big. Next, collaboration is critical. If there's one thing that I've learned, it is this: that all the gifts and talents necessary for a successful business, and certainly a farm business, I got a secret for you. They don't all grow on the same pair of legs. They don't. And this is hard for farmers. We farmers are an independent lot, you know. We're a bunch of crusty hermit curmudgeons, you know, who the reason we're farmers is because we don't like people. And so you go to the average farmer and say, would you like a partner? What? Me and Mama didn't come out here to have people around us. You got a better relationship with their John Deere than they do their spouse, you know. They get more turned on with anyway. Like pig iron is more sexy than anything else. I mean, it's crazy, all right? But the fact is that to be successful, it's going to take embracing the gifts and talents of other people. Daniel has a great way to explain this. He said, you know, every one of us has something that we have to do in our just to function in our lives, our business, whatever, that we really don't like to do. Okay, every one of us, you have to do certain things you just don't like to do. Do you realize that there are actually people in the world that can't wait to get up in the morning to do that job. Maybe for somebody it's reconciling the checkbook. Maybe for somebody else it's talking to bureaucrats on the phone to get a compliance license. Now, I can mention some of my pet ones that I don't like to do. But did you know there are actually people who love to do that. So this year we've actually hired a part-time compliance officer. I mean, the reams and reams of regulations, we might go to jail, not on purpose, but just, I might go on purpose too, but by accident because we just failed to check a box and we're getting big enough now that it's a concern. So we hired a part-time compliance officer. You know what? He loves to wake up in the morning and call bureaucrats and sit on hold and punch 5, 4, 2, 1, 3, and fill out forms. That's wonderful. He gives us a little invoice, gives us the requirements, and we sign our names. It's all, even sign your name, put a little yellow plastic tab, sign here, and I'm done. Good. I don't have to think about it, nothing. It's wonderful. Collaboration is critical. Number 6, fiefdoms are superior to employment. Everybody needs a fiefdom. This is one of the biggest breakthroughs we've had at our place. Everybody wants a fiefdom. Who wants to work for somebody? If we want bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, self-starter entrepreneur types, we don't want people that are just content to push a time clock and earn an hourly wage. I hate hourly wages. Nobody should get paid for just showing up, and there's always this tension, you're not working hard enough, and I'm working like a slave, and there's always this tension. So I like financial remuneration arrangements and collaborations in which each person can raise their own salary based on their own performance and has their own personal risk in the game. And so we have 3 marketers that are on straight commission. They don't get promised a penny. Our marketers get a commission. Somebody says, well, what if they earn a bigger salary than you do? Hey, suits me fine. I hope they do. This isn't about scarcity, it's about plenty. I hope they do. Richard, our delivery driver, when he goes over a certain amount, he gets a nice fat commission on every single pound that he delivers over a certain amount. You know what? That keeps him happy, joyful, customer service oriented, and looking for new customers to increase the flow. So you incentivize everybody with commissions and what we call memorandums of understanding. So we rent several properties. We have former interns and apprentices subcontracting as independent growers on those other farms, feeding into our brand name, but they're completely independent. They decide what they want to grow, what animals they want, what animals they don't, what things they want to do, and if they want to do something, add to what we're doing, fine. If it fits, that's great. So if a young person wants to stay with us, and basically we have an open-ended thing, if you want to stay with us, we don't feel compelled to provide you a job. That's a burden I wouldn't want. I wouldn't want to have the burden of being responsible for jobs. Man, that's a nightmare, okay? All I need to provide is a germination tray. So when a young person wants to stay, we don't say, okay, here's what we need done, you can do this, this, this. No, we say, okay, how are you going to earn your salary? Bring us your plan. And so last fall, we had an apprentice. He said, I don't want to leave. I said, okay, so how are you going to earn a living? He said, I want to become a shop foreman. And this guy is a gifted mechanic, fabricator. I mean, he'd rather weld than eat, right? Now, I weld and I do, shop work, but it doesn't float my boat. I like the cows better. I like the chainsaw, man. The chaw's cool. So the idea was, well, okay, so you want to do that. Well, how are we going to do this? And so he brought up a plan. We named it Farm Fix. He started a business. So he took over our shop. We let him gut the whole shop. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This shop has been there for 50 years. My shop. Suddenly, the hammers are over here, not here. The screwdrivers are over here, not here. I have to accept that change in order to create that germination trait. It's not going to look like me. And so we, Salatins, now understand that the farm in the future is not, we're not responsible. It's not our baby. It's the collective baby of the gifts and talents that we happen to have our cadre around us at a given time. Dan, you saw him there. He was our first on-farm chef. Well, he wanted to do the shiitake mushrooms. Great. Did his shiitake mushrooms. I cut him his logs. He inoculated wonderful shiitake mushrooms. Well, guess what? 2 years later, you know, he got married and had a couple kids, you know, the one that took the tomato and, you know, and I wanted to go back to Wisconsin, so we lost him. That's cool. You know, he's now doing full-time, you know, catering and farming. He's got a farm to table cater deal. Great. He spread his wings. Nobody wanted to do the shiitake mushrooms. You know what? That's okay. It's okay. So we have to have the humility to let the real-time gifts and talents that are around us shape, mold, and move our farm business. And if we actually practice that, I get chill bumps with the number of young people who want to stay. So basically, we feel like we're open-ended. We could take 20 if they all figured out how to make a living, okay? And so the weak link is not my vision. The weak link is me getting out of the way enough for all this youthful enthusiasm and energy to be expressed on our germination tray. Number 7, the equity of the farm needs to be in management and knowledge, okay? Typically, the average farm, the equity is tied up in the land and the buildings and the equipment. But the successful startup farm, and I think the successful long-term farm, the equity, I can tell you, the equity in our farm is not in machinery and buildings and land. The equity is in management and knowledge. In the U.S., the average depreciable capitalization to annual gross sales is $4 worth of machinery and buildings. Forget the land. Machinery and buildings, $4 to generate $1 in annual gross sales. Our ratio is 50 cents to $1. That's an 800% difference. But what we do is a lot of management, a lot of ecological caressing. See? And that takes people. People say, oh, what you do takes more people. Great. Why do we not want people? What is it that you don't want people around? I think it's wonderful to have people. So, what this means is that we have to have mentorship. We have to have leadership. We have to know something. That means we have to do something more with accounting than just throw the invoices and receipts in a box all year and then take them down to somebody to put them together for the government at the end of the year. It means we need to categorize our accounting. You know what? It means that we need to go out and time and create benchmarks for how long it takes. Read Elliot Coleman's 4 Seasons Harvest. I mean, there is a guy that, he will tell you, here are how many minutes it takes me to plant X number of feet of carrots and how many minutes it takes to harvest it. Industry does time and motion studies all the time. We farmers, we just think the world owes us a living. We go out with this big old, burden on our back, that the world owes us a living. And we don't understand that we're a business too. And so we need those kinds of things. So we make benchmarks. You should be able to move a poultry shelter in 60 minutes. You should be able to put away 30 dozen eggs in 20 minutes by hand. And we want our interns and apprentices to wear a watch, a stopwatch. Time them. Time yourself against the benchmark. Gut a chicken in 30 seconds. We want you to be able to gut a chicken in 30 seconds. It's taking 35? All right, well, get better. Get with it. Don't talk to me about it. Get on it. And what we want are time and motion studies because it's too easy to just feel like the world doesn't love me, you know, and doesn't appreciate me, won't pay for good food, blah, blah, blah. I think I'll go, you know, cry in my beer. No, this is a business. Get up and get at it. Number 8, electronic aggregation and retail interfaces. Woo, now he's gone off the deep end. Okay, what I'm talking about here is using the internet for electronically aggregating product. A lot of farmers are not good marketers. Okay, this kind of speaks to marketing and sales and that sort of thing. Originally, when I was putting this together, I thought, well, direct marketing, but no. What I'm really talking about is using electronic warehousing, electronic aggregation, and electronic interfacing in sales. We believe that this is kind of the next step. And if you're watching, you know, Amazon.com, eBay, what's the one in China, Alibaba, yeah. And it was Abu something. Okay, Alibaba. You're looking at these electronic mediums, you know, they're huge. The fact is that maintaining a physical bricks and mortar cashier cha-ching interface is expensive. It's really expensive overhead, and it's really expensive if you're small. So what we're doing and what we're seeing is more and more electronic social media interaction. We now sell, you know, half of our sales to the metropolitan buying clubs are done through an online shopping cart, okay, and that Sherry maintains on a commission. And that shopping cart is where people order and buy. Guess what? They don't have to take my time arguing, well, honey, they say they're out of ribeyes. What would you prefer to substitute with, you know? And you spend 20 minutes at farmer's market or at your farm stand or whatever waiting for hubby and wife, you know, to decide on what they're going to replace their ribeye steak because you were out the day. And they can have that argument, that discussion in their bedroom at 1 o'clock in the morning and then click buy now, and it comes in while we're sleeping. It's the coolest thing since sliced bread. So electronic aggregation. We now collaborate with a Relay Foods. It's a local integrator. It's a local outfit that works with about 40 farms, and they make home deliveries every week, and they tell us what they want. They've just been studied by MIT, which determined that their carbon footprint is way less than the supermarket model, because the supermarket model requires everybody to get in their car and go down and go shopping. This way, people do it on the internet, and the delivery guy is just on the road anyway, and he's just going house to house to house to house to house to house, making his drops, and that's way less of a carbon footprint than when everybody goes and makes their own selections off the supermarket shelves, as supermarket, you know, as counterintuitive as that may sound. So these are really cool systems. It allows you to get a higher margin. We're the middleman. We wear all the hats. You heard the middleman makes all the profits. Well, I want to be one then. It allows us to spread the customer base. So instead of selling to one customer, you know, one buyer, we're now selling to thousands and thousands of buyers, and they probably won't all lose their jobs or get disenfranchised at the same time. Emotional economic support. You know, people have always asked me, you know, how did you keep going when your neighbors thought you were lunatic and all that stuff? I said, it's our customers. You don't know how many times we've had a season, maybe a drought or a predator came and wiped out a shelter of chickens or whatever, and you know, we don't wear this on our sleeve. We don't make a big deal of it, but you know, if a customer happens to hear it, next thing you know, they're shoving a $100 bill in your pocket saying, look, we need you to stay in business. You just take that as a tip. Who gets that from the grain elevator? Who gets that from the sale barn? You know, who gets that from your great big buyer? Number 9, there's 10 of these, I'm almost done. Solutions are from the inside out, not the outside in. My goodness, I mean, I'm guilty of this. We're all guilty, aren't we, about when we have a problem, the first thing we want to do is go outside to solve it. We want to hire the expert, we want to hire the professional, or we want to buy what's in that bag. We want to buy the semen tank. We want to buy the seed, whatever. Okay, the fertilizer, whatever. And we're always looking at solving it from the outside in. But actually, what we've found with all of our young farmers and ourselves is that the real answers are always from the inside out. Okay? That's not saying you're never going to buy anything outside. All I'm suggesting is that the weak link generally is something generated either between our ears, that's the main big weak link, or it's something that we're not fully accessing the solar energy that's already hitting our farm. I mean, how many places I've been on where you go and the farmer's pulling a soils test, sending it off, the lab tells him he needs a ton of lime on his farm, and I go there and he doesn't even have a cow. Well, there's a lot of forage. It might not be the best in the world, and maybe it would like a little bit of calcium. But your weak link is not the calcium. The weak link is you have nothing to stimulate the decomposition and life cycle here to turn the solar energy into a decomposable material. It's a sterile environment. And so working from the outside in, what that means is that we're talking about a carbon-centric system. We're needing to really convert this on-site carbon. And finally, number 10, movement creates movement. So many people are stymied at starting because they want to make some sort of a 20-year plan, and it's what I call paralysis by analysis. And in our technological age, we've become a society of technicians, and we're paranoid of starting because we think about our computers. Think about your computer. If you hit a wrong button and the screen throws up something that you're not ready to see, it kind of throws you into a tailspin, doesn't it? And so we get because of this now, this mechanical, we are so connected and tied up with mechanics all the time that do have a very rigid set interface. Your car doesn't like to start if you put the key in the trunk. You would have got to put it in the ignition, right? And so we are all kind of almost now trained, aren't we, for the formula, this rigid thing. And so if we can't have all the contingencies figured out and all the T's crossed and the I's dotted way out there as far as we can imagine seeing, we're scared to take the first step. So I want to liberate you from that and give you the truth. The truth is, all of us come to adulthood with this patriarch or matriarch over our shoulders saying this statement: if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Right? You know what? That's wrong. You know what the truth is? If it's worth doing poorly first. That's the truth. I mean, think about it. You're at some Christmas gathering with all the crazy yo-yo family, right? All those weirdos. And crazy Uncle Tom and, talkative Aunt Matilda, whatever. Okay, and you're at Christmas, and the latest family addition is there, crawling around the floor, little Amy Sue, okay, Amy Sue, all right, she's cute. She's about 8 months old, she's crawling around, and all the adults are, talking, visiting. It's Christmas after all, right? And all of a sudden, what did I say her name was? Amy Sue? I always make up these new ones. Okay. So Amy Sue comes over here and she gets on the leg of a chair and she climbs up on this chair, right? And she kind of gets this horrified look, and probably her mom sees her first. She says, "Oh, look, Amy Sue, this is the first time she stood up. She's never done this. Look at this, she's standing up." And of course, all the adults, they immediately, look at Amy Sue and are all excited and smiling. Amy Sue suddenly, she realizes she's the center of attention, and her trepidation turns to a great big smile. Center of attention, loses her focus, loses her grip, and plop, down she goes on her diaper, right? What does everybody say to Amy Sue then? They all gather around her and say, "Well, Amy Sue, if you can't walk any better than that, just quit." Is that what they say? No. They come and say, "Oh, here, Amy Sue, let me take your hands and put it back up on the chair. We'll try again." The fact is, we don't do anything well first. We don't write well. We don't talk well. We don't walk well. We don't poop well. Well, maybe we do. We don't know where to put it. It takes time to learn how to do this stuff. So the truth is that if it's worth doing poorly first. And movement creates movement. You don't know where 20 steps out there is going to lead until you take the first step. And that movement creates informational. You take what you learned from that first step and you run it through all of your planning, your thinking, and your knowledge, and what the schools and conferences you've been to, and your tribe of encouragers and collaborators, and then you make the next step, and you make the next step. Learn by doing, and do it poorly first. So I want you to all commit yourselves that when you go home from this conference and you feel paralyzed by the fear of failure and doing it wrong, promise me that you'll look in the mirror, bathroom mirror maybe, okay? It'll be a little more native. And hike up your diapers and say, if it's worth doing poorly first. Because that's the truth. And that will liberate you from that, paralysis by analysis. So what do we have? In the final analysis, what we have are farms that are local-centric, carbon-centric, sales-centric, people-centric, animal life-centric, perennial-centric, management-centric, difference-centric, polycentric, and info-centric. And when we have those kinds of farms, we have opportunities unprecedented and unimaginable for our young people. We are so excited about what we see this young generation wanting to do. They are far more interested in saving the planet than in pillaging the planet. And that is a very, very helpful sign. Last year, we had 540 queries for our internship program, 540. 270 filled out the application, so see half of them wouldn't even fill out the application. And then we took 10 of them. But that trend has just been escalating dramatically on every farm that I know of that does a formal professional internship program. This world the young people are desperate for mentorship, for opportunities, and to jump in to these kinds of white-collar salaried, exciting, entrepreneurial, rewarding farms. And so I think that as we look at the future, I hope we will realize that the farms that actually stimulate and provide opportunities for our young people will not be the farms of the 1940s and 1950s. They will look different. They will track different in accounting. They will think differently. They won't be farms where the ideal of the farm is to have the biggest pickup truck, the biggest combine, and the biggest pad of concrete and the prettiest white picket fence. They're going to be farms that don't have a barn, don't have a combine, don't have a fence that you can see, don't have any of this stuff. Okay, but what they have is they have the ecstasy of no vet bills, no fertilizer bills, no equipment bills, all right? And they're absolutely populated by not hermit curmudgeons, but by people-oriented young people who are ready to caress our ecological umbilical like lovers rather than rapists. We have, in the next 15 years, supposedly in the U.S., 50% of America's farmland is going to change hands because of the average age of the American farmer. Think about that. 50% changing hands in the next 15 years. We can either be totally paranoid about that, say, oh no, is that all going to be taken by, foreign corporations and big, Monsanto and whatever? Or is that going to be taken over by a new generation of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, entrepreneurial self-starters who will love this land? God help us that latter would be the opportunity of a lifetime as we take these perfectly adapted ecological farms that just look really, really different because they're converting more sunlight into biomass, that we actually create an entirely different farmscape on our landscape. Thank you for letting me visit with you. Blessings on you. Let us do it. Thank you. It's very kind. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have 1 minute, so I'll do my blessing. May all of your carrots grow long and straight. May your radishes be large and not pithy. May Blossom End Right go to the neighbor chemical farmer, not your tomatoes. May the coyotes be struck blind at your pastured chickens. May all of your culinary experiments be delectably palatable. May the rain fall gently on your fields, the wind be always at your back, your children rise and call you blessed, and may we all make our nest a better place than we found. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel. His energy is so infectious. My goodness, what a first day. So we are at the end of the formal programming for the first day. A quick couple programming notes as we make our way out. First, as you walk out, I urge you to check out what's going on over there. It is amazing. So it's about 7 o'clock. Between 7 and 8, outside we have a cocktail hour. And as part of the cocktail hour, we're going to have 5 authors out there doing book signings. So we're going to have Joel Salatin will be joining us there. Courtney White will be there. Judy Schwartz will be there. Catherine Collins, as well as Alan Savory. And for those who are interested, at 7:30, back inside here, there's going to be a world premiere of a new film. The name of the film is We're Running Out of Time. It's a documentary about Alan Savory. It's about 45 minutes long. And for those who wish to watch it, you can go ahead and bring a drink in. It's absolutely fine. And it'll finish around 8:15. The cocktail hour ends around 8. So all forms of programming end around then. Tomorrow morning, we'll be starting at 8 o'clock for breakfast. 8:30 we'll be back in here. And these lanyards that you have, please keep them and bring them tomorrow as well, because we don't have a second issue, and that'll be part of what we'll be checking as you come in. Thank you again for joining. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.